Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
Welcome to The Explainer. This is The Explainer, where we take a deep dive into big topics by going straight to the source. All right, today we are getting into something we've all dreamt about, right? Hitting the jackpot. We're using Michael Mechanic's incredible book, Jackpot, to pull back the curtain. So what really happens when you suddenly have more money than you could ever imagine? Okay, to really set the stage, just listen to this quote from Bill Gates. It's just mind-boggling. We're talking about a level of wealth that you and I literally can't wrap our heads around. It's a point where money isn't for buying stuff anymore. It becomes something else. So what would you do? It's the ultimate fantasy question, isn't it? We all imagine the yachts, the endless vacations, total freedom. But as we're about to see, the reality of a massive windfall, it's a whole lot messier. Okay, so first, let's talk about the dream. This whole idea of striking it rich, it's not new. It's like it's baked into the American DNA, going way back to the very beginning. Get this, $81 billion. That's what Americans dropped on lottery tickets in just 1 year. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire economies of most countries. It's wild. You know, you're not really just buying a piece of paper. You're buying a license to dream. And what are your chances? About 1 in 292 million. Seriously, you have a better chance of being struck by lightning. But that dream, that fantasy, it's so powerful that a number like that barely even registers, does it? And it's not just about the lottery either. This desire for extreme wealth is huge for the younger generation. Think about this. For over 80% of college freshmen, the #1 life goal is to be very well off financially. That's seen as more important than, say, helping others or even just figuring out what life's all about. Kind of says a lot, right? So, the impossible happens. Someone actually wins. You'd think it's pure joy, right? Champagne popping everywhere. Well, what if I told you the very first feeling is often the complete opposite? Take this guy, James Everingham. He was an engineer at Netscape, became a millionaire practically overnight. He goes to an ATM just to see, and the balance is over $2 million. His reaction? Not a fist pump, not a smile. He said he felt incredible stress and almost passed out, just pure panic. And that's not a one-off thing. There's this lawyer, they call him the lottery lawyer, and his take is fascinating. He says, yeah, that first day is supposed to be joyful, but I never see that. He says all his clients come to him totally freaked out, overwhelmed, worried. The dream just became a terrifying reality. And this often leads to something you might not expect, a full-blown existential crisis. I mean, think about it. Your entire life, you have to work. You have a routine, and then, poof, it's gone. That structure disappears, and suddenly you're faced with this huge, scary question, now what? Having to work is simple. Having endless choices, that's paralyzing. So what's the natural reaction to all that anxiety? You start spending. You try to buy the happiness that was promised in the fantasy to make all that money feel real. And just look at the world you enter. It's just on another planet. A t-shirt isn't $20, it's $550. A coat isn't a couple $100, it's $18,000. Let's be real, that's not about staying warm. It's about entering a totally different world of spending, where the price is the whole point. Exactly. It's all about signaling. The steak isn't just a meal. The cocktail isn't just a drink. It's all about showing people you've made it. It's what researchers call an extrinsic pursuit. Basically, you're doing it for the reaction, for what other people think, not for the actual experience. But here's the big twist in the story. Chasing happiness by buying more and more expensive things, well, it doesn't really work. There's a limit, and you might be surprised where that limit is. So here's the million-dollar question, or maybe the billion-dollar question. Does more money actually make you happier? We're all programmed to think, of course it does. But the research tells a very, very different story. Okay, so researchers actually found a number. In North America, the sweet spot for happiness, for life evaluation, peaks at around $105,000 a year. What happens after that? Well, believe it or not, satisfaction can actually start to go down. Maybe because the jobs get more stressful, or you just start comparing yourself to even richer people. The treadmill never stops. And for some people, it's not just a lack of joy. It's actual pain. This quote from an heiress named Martha is just heartbreaking. She called her massive inheritance shameful and said, "It makes me want to cry." Can you imagine? For her, that giant number in her bank account wasn't a blessing. It was a curse, an emotionally crushing burden. And that feeling, that burden, that shame, it leads to another unexpected side effect of extreme wealth: incredible isolation. The super rich basically build a fortress around themselves. We're talking literal gated communities, private security details, buying houses through shell companies so nobody knows you live there. They have separate services for everything. It's a life designed for total privacy, which also means total separation from normal everyday community. This former CEO, Mike DePotti, he just lays it out perfectly. He says, "I live in a neighborhood where nobody's home. You can't just pop over to a neighbor's house to borrow a cup of sugar. There's no one there. It's this weird, empty world of giant, beautiful, lonely houses." And that isolation, it's now turning into something else. It's turning into fear. The same guy, Mike DePotti, admits he's starting to get scared. He sees the growing gap between the rich and everyone else, and literally says he worries people could come for them with pitchforks. That's a pretty powerful image, isn't it? Which brings us to the final, really big question here. We think of the jackpot as this purely personal dream, right? My money, my life. But after everything we've seen, the anxiety, the isolation, even the fear, you have to wonder, is it just a fantasy? Or is our obsession with it a much bigger societal issue? When we all dream of winning, what are we really chasing? And what are the hidden costs of that dream for all of us?
You know the dream, right? We all have some version of it. Winning the lottery, that startup IPO finally hitting, a massive inheritance out of nowhere. It's the ultimate fantasy, sudden, life-changing wealth. But what really happens when that fantasy becomes reality? Well, we're going to pull back the curtain on the shocking, complicated, and honestly, often stressful truth behind hitting the jackpot.
This quote, it just gets right to the heart of the fantasy, doesn't it? It's from an old lottery billboard, and it promises so much more than just money. It's promising a total transformation. It taps into that deep-down hope that a windfall won't just pay our bills, but it'll fix everything else too. It's an incredibly powerful and seductive idea.
So, to kick things off, let's just take a look at how widespread this jackpot fantasy really is. I think you might be surprised.
I mean, look at that number. It's pretty staggering. A 2016 Gallup poll found that nearly half of all American adults had bought a lottery ticket in the last year, 49%. And this isn't just one demographic. People with middle and even high incomes were just as likely, if not more likely, to play. This dream truly cuts across all classes.
Okay, so we've established the fantasy is everywhere. Now let's jump to the moment it becomes real. And here's where we hit our first surprising truth. That initial reaction is almost never what you'd expect. It's rarely pure joy.
So let me tell you about a guy named James Everingham. He was a coder at Netscape way back in the dot-com boom. He and his coworkers thought, maybe their stock options would be worth enough to buy a new car. Best case. Then the company went public. And about a week later, Everingham just goes to a regular ATM to pull out some cash for the weekend.
And this is what popped up on the screen. In today's money, that's over $2 million, just sitting in his checking account. Now keep in mind, the most he'd ever had in there before was maybe $4,000. This was an absolutely unimaginable number.
So what do you think he did? Pure euphoria? Run down the street screaming with joy? Nope. He said an incredible stress just slammed into him. He almost passed out right there in front of the machine. His first thought wasn't, "I'm rich." It was, "I don't know what to do with that." It was pure, unfiltered panic. And look, this isn't some one-off dot-com millionaire story. This is a pattern. There's a lawyer named Jason Curlin. They call him the lottery lawyer, and he sees this constantly. He says that whole screaming and jumping for joy part, that lasts for maybe a day. After that, his clients come to him worried, nervous, and, in his exact words, freaked out.
That initial shock wears off pretty quickly, and it gives way to a new and way more complicated problem: the social fallout.
James Everingham went through what you could call a total social whiplash. On one side, some of his closest friends, the people he worked with day in and day out, just stopped talking to him. The money put up a wall between them. And on the other side, suddenly, everyone wanted to be his best friend. It was, as he put it, super disconcerting. And the complications just keep piling up. For example, Everingham bought his mom her first ever new car. A wonderful gesture, right? Well, he found out later it made his brother feel depressed and totally inadequate because he could never do something like that for her. Then you have the sketchy financial advisors crawling out of the woodwork, long-lost relatives you've never heard of, charities hitting you up constantly. It gets so bad that one of the first pieces of advice for lottery winners is to just shut down all your social media. Immediately.
Okay, so let's say you manage to get through the initial shock and navigate that social minefield. That's when a deeper, more personal problem starts to creep in, the existential crisis. No, seriously, think about that for a second. For most of us, our jobs, our need to earn a living, that gives our life structure. It gives us a sense of purpose. When that necessity is just gone, what's left? This is precisely what happened to a man named Jeff Weissglass, who got a large inheritance. He said he felt absolutely unmoored, just adrift. He struggled with his identity so much that he began to dread going to parties because of that one simple question we all ask. So, what do you do? He didn't have an answer anymore.
And this isn't just a problem for people who inherit money. Mike DePotti was the CEO who sold his company for $430 million. I mean, jackpot. He said the euphoria lasted for a few days, and then it just vanished. It was replaced by this empty feeling and this nagging question, what's the next mountain I need to climb?
And believe me, the feeling does not go away with bigger numbers. This right here is a real text message that a tech founder sent right after his company sold for $4 billion. His immediate reaction wasn't celebration. It was a dark joke about his continued existential crisis. More money doesn't solve this problem. If anything, it seems to make it even bigger.
And that brings us to this final, really crucial point. For so many of these people, the dream of wealth doesn't become a liberation. It becomes a burden. It's like an albatross they have to carry around their neck. There's one inheritor who goes by the name Martha, and she has this incredibly powerful metaphor for her wealth. She calls it her cartoon anvil. You know, like in the old Looney Tunes? Just this massive, heavy thing always hanging right over her head. She also described it as a train coming at me, something you have to brace for, not something you get to enjoy.
When she was asked what it feels like to even say the number she's worth out loud, her response was immediate and just gut-wrenching. Shameful. She actually started to cry and said, "This is the fantasy. I've got the fantasy in my fucking drawer." You can just feel the conflict between what society tells her she should feel and the shame and anxiety she actually feels. It's profound.
And this burden isn't just internal. For some of the ultra-wealthy, it's starting to become an external dread. Mike DePotti, the same CEO from before, admits that for the first time in his life, he's worried about income inequality. Not just for moral reasons, but out of actual fear. He says they could come for us with pitchforks.
So, it all brings us back to this one big question. When we buy that lottery ticket, when we dream of that IPO, what are we really hoping to win? Is it just the money? Or is it something more, like freedom or happiness, respect, maybe a sense of purpose? Because as all these stories show, the money itself is no guarantee of any of that. In fact, sometimes it just makes those things a whole lot harder to find. Something to think about.
Hey, and welcome. So today, we are diving into a world where price tags are pretty much irrelevant. A world where the biggest luxury isn't what you buy, but how you buy it. Yeah, we're taking a look inside the psychology of how the super rich really spend their money.
This quote from Steve Martin just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? We all have that secret list, right? The list of kind of ridiculous things we'd buy if we suddenly had way more money than we knew what to do with. Like $300 socks.
So just for a second, let's imagine it. You check your ticket. The numbers match. Your bank account is suddenly overflowing with zeros. What is the very first, totally impractical, wonderfully dumb thing that you are buying? Go ahead, think about it. Because we're about to explore the psychology of what happens when that daydream becomes somebody's reality.
See, when money is truly no object, the whole reason for buying things, it just fundamentally changes. It's not about what you need anymore. It's about status, it's about identity, it's about sending a message. And to really get this, we've got to look at two totally different kinds of goals that drive all of us.
Okay, so on one side, you've got what are called extrinsic pursuits. This is all about outside validation, right? Fame, looking good, showing off your wealth, having cool stuff. Then, on the other side, you've got intrinsic goals. This is the internal stuff, self-acceptance, feeling part of a community, having real relationships.
And here's the absolute key. The world of extreme luxury, it is built almost entirely on those extrinsic, external goals.
So let's start our little window shopping trip with things we all know, food and fashion. Except these versions have price tags that are designed to scream one thing: status. So yeah, prepare for some serious sticker shock. First up, a nice steak dinner. At Prime 112 in Miami, you can get this one steak for $230. So, is it just about how good it tastes? Of course not. It's about the elite experience. And maybe more importantly, it's about posting it on Instagram to prove you were there.
Now this one is kinda wild. These sneakers cost over $500 because they already look worn out. The scuffs, the dirt, it's all intentional. It is a perfect example of what the source material calls a superficial kind of exclusivity. You're literally paying a premium to look like you don't care, even though that effortless vibe was meticulously manufactured.
And this is just a masterclass in irony. So Kurt Cobain once famously wore this homemade t-shirt that said, "Corporate magazines still suck." Well, the high fashion brand Vetments went and recreated it and slapped a $550 price tag on it. It's the ultimate extrinsic signal, taking an anti-corporate message and selling it for a massive corporate profit.
And to top it all off, you can stroll into the Aria in Las Vegas and drop $1,500 on one cocktail. I mean, it's gone in a few minutes, right? But the story and the status you get from telling people about it, well, that lasts a whole lot longer. It just proves that even the most temporary experiences can be packaged and sold as a luxury good.
But look, for the truly, truly wealthy, buying expensive stuff off the shelf, that's just the entry level. The next level of exclusivity isn't about buying what's for sale. It's about commissioning things that don't even exist yet. Welcome to the world of bespoke.
The word bespoke actually comes from old-timey tailoring. It meant that a piece of fabric had been spoken for by a specific customer. Now it means you're working one-on-one with an artisan to create something that is totally 100% unique to you. This isn't just about buying expensive things anymore. It's about creating something that sets you apart from literally everyone else.
Take a bespoke suit, for example. This isn't a quick trip to the store. This process takes months. It involves multiple in-person appointments. First, they take dozens of measurements. Then you come back for a basted fitting. It's like a rough draft of the suit you can wear. After that, a forward fitting where it's almost done. And then finally, the last fitting to make sure every single detail is perfect. This isn't shopping. It's a deep, creative collaboration. And the things they create are just on another level. I mean, imagine a Vacheron Constantin watch custom-built to chime only once a year on your wife's birthday. Or an iPhone completely rebuilt with 24-karat gold and Nile crocodile leather. Or how about a $45,000 suit made from the wool of wild vicuñas that roam the Andes? These aren't just products anymore. They are personal stories you can hold in your hand.
So, what happens when you can afford any object on Earth, bespoke or not? Well, the ultimate luxury becomes something you can't even touch. At the very, very top, wealth is used to buy two things: privacy and power. The ability to completely separate yourself from the rest of the world.
You see this perfectly at places like the Twin Farms Resort in Vermont. Rooms there start at $2,000 a night, and it has its own private ski mountain and helipad. During a tour described in our sources, the guide was super careful to steer the rider away from any spot where a guest might be. The real luxury isn't just the fancy stuff. It's the absolute guarantee that no one will ever bother you.
And this desire for power and separation is on full display with hypercars. You're not just buying a way to get from A to B, you're buying a personality. On one hand, you've got the Lamborghini Aventador. It's described as violent and intimidating. It even has an ignition switch under a red flip cover, like you're launching a missile. On the other hand, you have the Bentley Mulsanne, elegant, imposing, with floor mats made of pure lamb's wool.
And the customization is just limitless. There's a story about a Rolls-Royce painted Elena's red to match a client's favorite lipstick. And now, nobody else can get that specific color without the family's permission. Or another owner who had his Yorkshire Terrier embroidered on the headrests. Basically, if you can dream it, and you have the money, they can build it.
So, after this wild ride through $1,000 cocktails and custom-colored cars, let's circle all the way back to where we started, the psychology of it all. What does this never-ending chase for exclusivity actually tell us? When you get right down to it, this whole world, from the $200 steak to the lipstick-red Rolls-Royce, is the ultimate extrinsic game.
It's a constant, high-stakes performance to signal to your peers just how unique, how successful, how special you are. It's a search for validation that comes completely from the outside in.
And that really brings us to a final thought. We've just toured a world built entirely on these external, extrinsic rewards. So it kind of begs the question, right? What are the intrinsic ones? What are the things that bring us real fulfillment that you can't buy or commission or park in a climate-controlled garage? It's a good reminder that while all this stuff is fascinating to look at, maybe the real value lies in the things that don't have a price tag at all. Thanks for joining me on this one.
So, what if winning the lottery was actually the worst thing that could ever happen to you? I know, it sounds absolutely crazy, right? But we're about to dive deep into the paradox of extreme wealth, and we're going to uncover why, for some people, having everything is still somehow not enough. And it all starts with this really powerful idea from Karl Marx. It just perfectly captures the heart of our story today. It's not really about what you have, it's about what you have compared to the person living next door. This idea, this concept of relative wealth, is the key to understanding everything that follows.
Okay, picture this. You're scrolling through Zillow just for fun, and you stumble on a 4-bedroom house. The list price, $17.8 million. Now, for that kind of money, you're imagining a pristine masterpiece, right? The absolute pinnacle of luxury.
Well, here's the kicker. The real estate listing actually says ideal for new construction. What does that mean? It means for nearly $18 million, you're not buying the house. You're just buying the land. The house itself, it's considered a teardown. And no, this is not some weird hypothetical. This is the reality in America's most exclusive zip code.
So, welcome to Atherton, California. This is the epicenter of a kind of wealth that's so extreme, it basically operates by its own rules. A world where the ground beneath your feet can be worth infinitely more than the multi-million-dollar mansion that's just sitting on top of it. I mean, the scale of this market is it's staggering. Look at this. An empty 1-acre lot will set you back $8.5 million. Just dirt. Then, a few streets over, a modern home goes for $26 million. We're not just talking about being expensive. This is a completely different economic universe. And what do you get for that $26 million? The features are just unbelievable. We're talking heated floors, sure, but also glass walls that completely vanish into the structure, countertops made of a rare gemstone, and get this, a 2-story climbing wall inside a kid's bedroom. So who are these people living in these incredible homes? And, what are the unspoken rules of this ultra-exclusive club? Let's take a look inside the Gilded Cage. Well, you've got people like tech mogul James Everingham. When he was asked about his magnificent kitchen, he kind of laughed and said, "One kitchen? I have 2. There's the main family kitchen, and then a second, smaller one that's just for the catering staff." And then you have the people who serve this market, like Malin Giddings, known as the Queen of San Francisco real estate. She sold over $4.5 billion worth of property. But a huge part of her job, as she tells it, is basically acting as a therapist to billionaires who just can't understand that sometimes even their money has limits. And this just says it all, doesn't it? A client will demand a home with both a sweeping city view and a big, sunny garden. The thing is, in San Francisco, that's pretty much geographically impossible. But when you're used to getting absolutely everything you want, the word no is a foreign concept you have to be talked down from. And the whole process of buying one of these places, it's nothing like how normal people do it. All the transactions are hidden behind shell companies to ensure privacy. There are absolutely no open houses. One realtor called that idea a petting zoo, and before you can even step foot inside a property, you have to prove you can actually afford it. But that old school, old money desire for privacy, it's starting to shift. A new kind of wealth has shown up, and it sparked this kind of arms race for size and status, leading us straight into the era of McMansions and now gigamansions. Researchers have actually put a name to this phenomenon. They call it the McMansion effect, and here's how it works. Your satisfaction with your own giant house is perfectly fine, right up until the moment your neighbor builds one that's even bigger. That's when your own mansion suddenly starts to feel a little inadequate. And this really highlights a major cultural shift. See, old money was all about privacy. They used what they called lush screening, trees and hedges to hide their homes from view. New money? They want the exact opposite. It's all about hyper-extrinsic showmanship. The entire point is to be seen. This whole new way of thinking has given rise to the giga mansion.
These aren't just big houses anymore. They're basically monuments to wealth, built for one reason and one reason only, to make a statement. And the ultimate example of this has to be a project in Los Angeles simply known as The One. Get a load of these specs. It's over 100,000 square feet with an asking price of $500 million. It has its own private nightclub, a 50-car garage, 4 infinity pools, and even a room where the walls and ceiling are jellyfish tanks. This isn't a home. It's a private resort built for one person. This constant, relentless race for more really makes you wonder, does any of this stuff actually make people happier? Well, science has a pretty fascinating answer, and it leads us to something called the happiness plateau. So to answer that exact question, a team of psychologists analyzed data from the Gallup World Poll. And this wasn't some small sample. They looked at more than 1.7 million people from all over the globe to find the real relationship between our income and our well-being. And what they found is just fascinating. So yes, money can buy happiness, but only up to a point. Researchers call this the satiation point. For North Americans, that magic number for day-to-day positive feelings is around $65,000 a year. For overall life satisfaction, it's about $105,000. But this is the most incredible part of the whole study. After you pass that satiation point, the researchers actually observed that life satisfaction scores often start to go down. That's right, having more money beyond that peak was actually correlated with a decrease in happiness. So why on earth would more money make you less happy? Well, the answer isn't just in the data. It's in the very human cost of toxic comparison, in the emptiness of having too much. I mean, just consider the story of Sam Polk. He was a hedge fund trader who became genuinely angry, like mad, that his year-end bonus was only $3.6 million. And why? Because he knew his boss was taking home $400 million. In the tiny little bubble he lived in, his huge jackpot felt like nothing. The wealth psychologist Dr. Bob Kenny puts it perfectly. He says, retail therapy works, but so does cocaine. The problem is, it wears off. That thrill you get from a new purchase, it just fades, so you need a bigger and bigger hit. He tells a story about a client of his who bought 3 Teslas and a BMW and was still completely miserable. So all of this, the teardowns, the giga mansions, the scientific data, the personal stories of dissatisfaction, it leaves us with one final, really crucial question we should probably ask ourselves. If a palace next door shrinks our house to a hut and winning the biggest prize in the world doesn't guarantee happiness, then what are we all actually racing for?
Today we're going to pull back the curtain on a hidden economy. It's this world that's built not just on what you can buy, but on who you can reach, what doors you can open, and how much of your precious time you can save. This is what we're calling the access econ. And this classic quote from Henry Ward Beecher, it really gets to the heart of it. It perfectly captures what the ultra-wealthy value most. You see, it's not just about stacking up money. It's about using that money to buy back the one resource you can never make more of: time. To really get this, let's look at something we all go through: a doctor's visit. Now, picture the typical scene: a packed waiting room, those buzzing fluorescent lights, and a maybe 10-minute rushed appointment with a doctor who's trying to see close to 2,000 patients. But on the other side of this divide, it's a completely different reality. No waits, comfy leather sofas, and these long, unhurried appointments with a doctor whose entire patient list is less than 300 people.
Now, this isn't just about a nicer waiting room. Not at all. It's a completely different way of doing healthcare, and it has a name: concierge medicine. And it's our first real look into how this whole access economy actually works.
So, how's it work? Well, for an annual fee, usually somewhere between $2,000 and $10,000, though some practices charge way more, like up to $40,000, members get this level of proactive, personalized, and private care that is, frankly, just unimaginable in the standard system.
And here's where the numbers really tell the story. Your average physician is responsible for, up to 1,900 patients. A concierge doctor? 300, maybe fewer. I mean, one practice that was mentioned in the source material caters to just 24 people. This isn't just about better service. It completely changes the entire dynamic of healthcare.
And the perks that come with that, they're just staggering. I mean, we're talking about having your doctor's personal cell phone number. You can call or text them anytime. House calls? You got it. Advanced DNA testing to tailor your treatment. They even have in-house pharmacies that will deliver prescriptions right to your door.
But
And this is key. This personalized, time-saving model isn't just for healthcare. It stretches into pretty much every aspect of life for those who can afford it, creating this sort of parallel track of services for almost everything.
We are talking about a massive, multi-billion-dollar industry in the U.S. alone. Its entire reason for being is to serve the cash-rich, time-poor, saving them that precious time by handling literally any request at any time.
And this didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It really evolved from that legendary Les Clefs d'Or network of Parisian hotel concierges way back in the 1920s. But things really kicked into high gear when companies like American Express took the whole concept global, first with their Platinum card and then with the mythical Centurion, or as most of us know it, the Black Card.
Okay, so let's get into this, because this is where things go from just luxurious to, well, almost unbelievable. This is the world of the impossible request, where money doesn't just buy you things, it buys you a completely different set of rules to live by. In this card right here, this is the key that unlocks that world. You can't just apply for it, it's by invitation only. The Centurion card basically signals that its owner is what the industry calls a whale, a high roller with such insane resources that the word no is rarely part of the conversation.
And this just perfectly illustrates the lengths these services will go to. It's not always about big, flashy things. A kid needs authentic sand from the Dead Sea for a school project in London? No problem. An agent is dispatched by motorcycle to go get it. Problem solved. But yeah, they handle the big requests too. What's the biggest credit card charge you can even imagine? How about this? $170 million. That is the price of a Modigliani painting the billionaire Liu Yi-chan reportedly just put on his Amex Black Card. The travel points alone from that purchase would be enough for a lifetime of free first-class flights.
Another huge player in this space is a company called Quintessentially. Their whole brand is built on taking this concept to the absolute extreme. Their slogan promises to make fantasy a reality for its members, who apparently include hundreds of billionaires.
This just goes to show you, nothing is off limits. You want to have a private engagement party at the Pyramids of Giza? They'll get on the phone with the Egyptian government and make it happen. It's about completely rewriting what is possible.
And the list of things they pulled off, it reads like something out of a fantasy novel. A romantic dinner for two on an iceberg, getting a taxidermied great white shark for a photo op, tracking down the actual horse from the movie Dances with Wolves and shipping it to Europe. If you can dream it up and you can pay for it, they can probably do it.
But once you get past the spectacle of it all, the sharks and the pyramids, you start to realize something. The product isn't really the thing itself. The real product, the ultimate currency in this world, is access. And this is where that two-tiered system really comes into sharp focus. Take an exclusive event like the Tiger Jam Poker Tournament. It's not really just a party. It's a carefully designed networking hub where massive wealth, celebrity, and corporate power all come together. The buy-in for the poker game might be $11,000, but the real value is who is sitting at that table with you. And that access creates this really powerful feedback loop. Your wealth gets you in the room. In that room, you make connections that mean your calls get returned by senators and CEOs. Those connections then lead to perks like free Super Bowl tickets or having the initiation fees waived at exclusive clubs. And because you're not spending money on all that, you can invest that cash to generate even more wealth. It just keeps going. And as one insider put it, this is the most corrosive part of the whole thing. It's not the toys or the fancy trips. It's the undeserved access to whatever you want, whoever you want. That's what fundamentally changes the way our society works. So what's the big takeaway here? What does it all mean when society is effectively operating on two different planes of reality, governed by two totally different sets of rules and possibilities? The author of our source material brings it all right back to where we started with this really sharp critique. After seeing this whole world of unbelievable luxury, he circles back to that concierge doctor's office, and he basically poses a choice: the coffee and croissants in an exclusive waiting room or basic healthcare access for everyone. And that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? In an economy where the most valuable thing you can have isn't a product you can hold, but a key to a completely different reality, the issue isn't just about who gets in, it's about who gets left behind.
You know that dream, right? Hitting the lottery, telling your boss you're out, and just sailing off into the sunset? It's a fantasy we all kind of share. But what if I told you that whole idea of freedom is, well, a total myth? What if getting insanely rich doesn't mean you stop working? What if it just means you've been hired for a brand new, all-consuming job? Let's get into it.
There's this old proverb that just nails it perfectly. The art is not in making money, but in keeping it. And that's really the core of what we're talking about today. The real challenge, it turns out, isn't just getting the money. It's the non-stop, full-time job of managing it, preserving it, and making sure you don't lose it.
So let's just lay it all out. The fantasy versus the reality. On one hand, you've got the dream, less work, way more fun. But the reality? It's a super demanding, full-time job. We think of ultimate freedom, but what really shows up is constant worry and anxiety. And that idea of having no responsibilities? Forget about it. Instead, you're hit with a daily storm of really complex decisions. So how on earth does this actually happen?
All right, here's the plan. We're going to start with something called the jackpot paradox. Then we'll dive into the fear and loathing that comes with big money. After that, we'll look at why you need to assemble an entourage, go inside the secret world of the family office, and finally, tackle the very tricky tax game.
Okay, first up, the jackpot paradox. This is the whole idea that your giant fortune isn't your ticket to freedom. Nope. It's more like a demanding child. It's a brand new kind of work where your money itself becomes this needy thing that you constantly have to take care of.
And this analogy is just perfect, isn't it? A massive fortune isn't just a pile of cash sitting in a vault. It's alive. You have to feed it with smart investments. You have to nurture it through crazy market swings. You're always fretting over it, and you're constantly cleaning up its messes. Think about it. Yachts need crews, mansions need staff. Even giving money away requires a whole team to vet the charities. All the so-called fun stuff becomes a massive chore. And listen, this isn't just some abstract idea. Let me tell you about a guy named Michael. His dad left him a messy estate. We're talking $30 to $40 million. Sounds great, right? Well, trying to untangle it all, hiring the lawyers, figuring out all the assets, it became so overwhelming that he had to put his PhD on hold for 2 years. His inheritance literally became his unwanted, full-time job. So, okay, it's a ton of logistical work, but it goes so much deeper than that. Let's talk about the emotional side of this new job, the psychological cost of having a 9-figure net worth, the fear and the loathing.
This quote just says it all. It's from an entrepreneur named Jonathan. He says, "You move from this mentality of creating wealth to preserving it. All of a sudden, I get scared to death of losing something that I never had before." I mean, wow, he went from this creative, build-it-bigger mindset to one that's totally based on fear. He's now terrified of losing a fortune he didn't even have a few years ago. That's a huge mental shift.
Which brings us to a really wild question. What could the super rich and the very poor possibly have in common? I mean, it sounds crazy, right? But the answer is actually pretty profound.
It's wild, but when you look at the anxieties, they are shockingly similar. At both extremes, there's this constant fear and anxiety swirling around money, either the fear of losing it all or the fear of never having enough. It has a huge impact on your self-worth and your ego. It puts a massive strain on family and marriage, and it can lead to this real social isolation where you just don't know who you can actually trust.
So, okay, if you've got this demanding child of a fortune that's causing you all this anxiety, what do? Well, you don't do it alone. You hire help. You assemble a professional entourage to help you co-parent your money.
And this quote from a tech co-founder named Jerry Fidler, it just perfectly captures that oh my god moment. He just sold $20 million in stock, and his first thought was, holy shit, what do I do with it? Do I put it all in my checking account? I mean, you can't just deposit $20 million into your checking account, right? That's the exact moment you realize you need help, big time.
And that help has a name. It's called a family office. So what is that? Just think of it like this. It's a private company, but its only client is one super rich family. They're basically the CEO for the family's entire financial life and a lot of their personal life too.
All right, so let's pull back the curtain and take a look inside this super exclusive billion-dollar industry that honestly most of us have never even heard of.
So the idea itself isn't new. You had old money families like the Morgans and the Rockefellers setting these up way back in the 1800s. But what's really crazy is the recent explosion. There are over 10,000 of these family offices worldwide, and get this, more than half of them popped up since the year 2000. That's all thanks to the modern tech boom and the new wave of finance.
And the scale we're talking about here is just immense. For a multi-billionaire, just the cost to run a full-service family office can be more than $10 million a year. And let me be clear, That's not the money they're investing. That's just the annual salary and overhead for the team of people who manage the money. It's mind-boggling.
And you might be wondering, what do they even do all day? Well, their to-do list is just staggering. It's everything. I mean, it's the mundane stuff like paying the family's electric bill, all the way up to the massive stuff like managing the properties, the yachts, the helicopters. They plan the parties, the family reunions, even the funerals. They handle prenups. They even have to teach the kids about financial literacy so they don't blow the entire fortune.
Okay, so when you have that level of management, that much money, it naturally brings us to one of the most complicated and, let's be honest, controversial topics of all: taxes, and the moral maze that comes with them.
Now, there's this really famous opinion from a judge named Learned Hand, and it's basically become the philosophy for a lot of wealthy people. The idea is this: taxes are not a patriotic duty or a moral choice. He said nobody owes a public duty to pay more than the law demands. So the thinking goes, it's not about what's fair, it's about what's legally required. And there's no obligation to pay a single penny more. Now, obviously, a lot of people disagree with that, but this is the legal mindset they're working from.
And this is a super important point we have to make. We're talking about tax avoidance, not tax evasion. Avoidance is legal. It's using every single rule and loophole in the very complex tax code to pay as little as possible. Tax evasion, on the other hand, is illegal. That's just straight up breaking the law and not paying what you owe. Two very different things.
So that tech founder, Jerry Fidler, he has a really great way of explaining this mindset. He actually fought against the idea of software patents. He thought they were terrible for innovation. But he lost. The law was passed. So what did he do? He immediately hired a lawyer and started patenting everything his company made. His logic was, look, you can fight to change the rules, but while the rules are what they are, you have to play the game to survive. And that is the exact same logic a lot of the super rich apply to the tax code.
And all of this brings us to one last, really fascinating question to leave you with. A wealth advisor named Richard Watts says rich parents are always asking the wrong question. They're obsessed with how much is too much to leave our kids without ruining them. But he says maybe, just maybe, the better question is, how much is too little? As in, too little to really make a positive dent in the world. And that question just completely reframes the whole purpose of wealth, doesn't it? It shifts it from being a private burden to maybe a public responsibility.
You know, we live in a world that basically screams one thing at us. If you get more money, more status, more stuff, you'll be happy. So why is it that so many people who actually get all of that end up feeling pretty miserable? Well, today, we're going to dig in and find out. This quote right here, it just nails the paradox we're about to unpack. It's this idea that chasing more isn't just hard. It might actually be a game that's literally impossible to win. And that gets us right to the heart of the issue. Our whole consumer culture is built on this really simple promise, right? Work hard, get rich, buy cool things, and boom, happiness. But as we're about to see, the evidence suggests that promise is, well, often a lie. So here's the big question we're really trying to answer. Why does this path that's supposed to lead to the good life so often end in a place that feels like the exact opposite, full of anxiety, debt, and just this deep feeling that something's missing? To figure that out, we have to look at what really drives us. It turns out the answer seems to lie in these two totally different ways of looking at life, these two competing value systems. You've got intrinsic pursuits on one side and extrinsic ones on the other. What's so interesting here is how clear the difference is when you lay it out. Intrinsic values are all about feeding our basic psychological needs, things like community, personal growth, real connection. It's about who you are on the inside. But extrinsic values, they're all about the outside world, what other people see. It's about money, status, and what you have. Okay, so what happens when we really start to prioritize those outward-facing goals? Well, as we're about to see, choosing that path comes with a very real and often very high psychological price tag. This quote is just, wow. It tells you everything. This comes from a guy already incredibly wealthy who was at a summit for billionaires. We're talking people with $500 million or more. And even in that room, the game was still about comparing who had more. It just goes to show you, no matter how much you have, if you're playing the extrinsic game, there's always someone with a bigger boat. And look, this isn't just a gut feeling. The research on this is solid. The psychologist Tim Kasser has shown again and again that the more people focus on materialistic values, the more likely they are to report these really negative outcomes: less happiness, more anxiety, higher debt, and worse relationships. It's the total opposite of what the ads promise us. I mean, listen to this. It's just so raw and honest. This is from a successful Morgan Stanley banker who finally realized that the life he'd worked so hard to build, the one that looked so perfect from the outside, it felt like a cage. He had all the rewards, all the extrinsic stuff, but he felt completely and utterly trapped.
Now, let's look at where this whole dynamic plays out in maybe its most extreme form: the world of professional sports. This is where you see young people suddenly get handed fortunes that are just beyond imagination.
Take a look at this number: $82 million. That was the estimated career earnings of NFL superstar Warren Sapp, one of the best-paid defensive players of his generation. So you have to ask yourself, how is that even possible? How does a person who earned enough money for several lifetimes end up with nearly $7 million in debt? The answer isn't just that he's spent his money, it's how he spent it. His bankruptcy filing basically reads like a shopping list for pure external validation. A lion skin rug, hundreds of pairs of sneakers still in their boxes, luxury watches. This wasn't about things he needed. It was all about projecting an image of success and status. And the crazy thing is, Sapp's story isn't some one-off thing. Former player Andre Rison just comes right out and says it. He spent $1 million on jewelry alone. It shows you this culture where the bling isn't just an accessory, it's how you measure your worth. So what makes them so vulnerable? Well, it's really a perfect storm. You've got these young guys, a lot of them from tough backgrounds, who are suddenly given massive amounts of cash with zero financial education. Then you throw in a hyper-macho culture where attention and status are everything, and you have a recipe for absolute disaster.
This quote from another top draft pick, Jamarcus Russell, just says it all, doesn't it? You can hear that reflection in his voice, looking back at a purchase he made purely for show, for an image that just seems completely absurd to him now.
Okay, so this isn't just about individual athletes making bad choices. Let's zoom the lens out for a second, because this pattern actually creates a really worrying trend for all of us, for our entire society.
What we're looking at here is a dangerous feedback loop. So when people feel insecure, because the economy is shaky or society feels unstable, they tend to double down on extrinsic values like money and status to feel safe. But the problem is, a society full of people focused on that stuff becomes more selfish and more distrustful, which, you guessed it, creates even more instability. It just feeds on itself.
And the fallout from this cycle is huge. A culture that's all about materialism pushes us to compete instead of cooperate. It makes us less likely to care about huge collective problems like climate change. Basically, it eats away at our ability to work together to solve the very challenges that are making us feel insecure in the first place.
Okay, I know that all sounds pretty bleak, but after all of that, there actually is some good news. The research is really clear on this. This is not a permanent state. We are not stuck here.
And here is the most important part, the real key takeaway. Our values are not set in stone. We have agency. Just by becoming aware of these two competing systems, we can consciously choose to put our energy and focus on the intrinsic values, the ones that the research shows actually lead to a happy, fulfilling life. And get this, it's not just some nice theory, they've actually proven it. In his studies, Tim Kasser found that if you simply prompt materialistic people to think for a few moments about intrinsic values, like family, freedom, helping others, it immediately makes them more empathetic and more willing to tackle big social and environmental problems. The shift can happen that fast. Which really leaves us with this final thought. It's true, our consumer culture pushes us, hard, towards those extrinsic goals. But at the end of the day, a culture is just the sum of all of our individual choices. So the question for all of us is, what values are we going to choose to live by? Not just for our own happiness, but for the kind of world we want to build together. Most of us have probably dreamed of hitting the jackpot, right? Gaining the kind of wealth that just solves all our problems. But what if that wealth creates a whole new set of problems we never even saw coming? So today we're going to dive into these surprising and often hidden social costs of getting rich. And, the philosopher Bertrand Russell really hit on a core human truth with this one. Our satisfaction, our envy, our ambition, we don't really measure that stuff against some distant, abstract ideal.
Nope. We measure it against the people right next to us. And that one idea, this whole thing about relative comparison, man, that's the key that unlocks everything we're about to get into.
So where does this all start? Well, it begins with a very natural, very human instinct. We look at our lives, our communities, our surroundings, and we just want things to be a little bit better. I mean, who can argue with that, right? Wanting a safer place for your kids to play or a school with better resources, that's a universal desire. But here's the thing, that totally understandable drive. It's the first, almost invisible step on a path that can lead to some really profound social separation. Okay, so what happens when you combine that natural drive for a better life with the actual money to make it happen? Well, you end up with what researchers call income segregation. Basically, people start physically grouping up with others who are on the same economic level. They create these bubbles. And wow, the data really shows just how dramatic this shift has been. Just look at this. Back in 1970, almost 2/3 of American families lived in what you'd call a middle-income neighborhood. Fast forward to 2012, and that number has crashed down to just 44%. I mean, that's not a small change, right? That's a huge geographic sorting that has literally reshaped the country. And yeah, there's actually a name for this, wealth flight. It's a lot like the idea of white flight, which you've probably heard of, but this one is driven purely by economics. As inequality in a city goes up, the more affluent folks are more likely to pack up and move away from mixed income areas and into their own exclusive enclaves. And this quote, this really gets to the heart of why people do this. See, it's not just about having a nicer lawn. It's about escaping that feeling of being judged that comes with having a lot more money than other people. Inside the bubble, there's a shared understanding, a sense of safety from an outside world where it feels like people always want something from us. And the sheer scale of wealth today makes this kind of segregation almost unavoidable. Just think about this for a second. In 1965, a CEO made about 21 times what their average worker did. You could still kind of relate. By 2019, that ratio had absolutely exploded to 320 to 1. A gap that big? That's not just a financial gap, it's a social chasm. Okay, so life inside the bubble. Sure, it might be comfortable, but that comfort comes with a price, a psychological one. It's like an echo chamber that can subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, warp your entire perception of what's normal. Okay, this is absolutely fascinating. A study from Dartmouth actually found that as your neighbor's incomes go up, your own reported happiness tends to go down. Remember what Bertrand Russell said at the beginning? It's that comparison game all over again. Living next to people with more can make you feel like you have less, even if, you're objectively doing great. And here's a perfect real-world example of that warped perspective. This is a quote from a woman, Sally, who described her family's income of $400,000 to $500,000 a year as being solidly middle class for the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, so just hold that thought for a second, because the actual data, it tells a very different story. An income of $450,000 is not middle class, not by a long shot. It actually puts a family in the top 7% of one of the wealthiest regions on the entire planet. That, right there, is the bubble effect in action. When everyone around you is that wealthy, the definition of normal gets seriously twisted. And this cost, it isn't just personal. It can be professional, too. A tech millionaire named Everingham points this out perfectly. He says if you're building products, you need empathy. I mean, how can you build a great product for people whose problems you don't even see anymore? You lose that crucial perspective when you're not around those everyday struggles. So, this separation from the rest of the world, it often leads to one of the most painful costs of all, the damage that wealth can do to your oldest, most important relationships with friends and family. All of a sudden, you're navigating a social minefield. Simple stuff becomes incredibly complex. Friends might hesitate to ask you to hang out, assuming they can't afford what you want to do. You feel like you can't complain about money worries they'd kill to have. And then there's the big one, being asked for a loan. And the entrepreneur Jerry Fiedler just nails this feeling. When a friend or family member asks for money, you are totally trapped. If you say no, there could be resentment forever. If you say yes and they can't pay it back, the whole relationship gets incredibly awkward. It's what you'd call a classic lose-lose situation. Man, this next quote from a woman named Martha, it's just heartbreaking.
She's at dinner with her old friends, and they're all talking about something super common, worrying about being able to afford retirement. But because her financial situation is totally different, she's shut out of the conversation. She just has nothing to add. So she's literally sitting right there with them, but socially, she's completely isolated.
And here we have Everingham again, who, by the way, is no longer on speaking terms with his own sibling. He's really clear that money wasn't the only reason they fell out, but his wealth acted like gasoline on a fire. It took what might have been a normal disagreement and turned it into a permanent break in their family.
So all of this, it leads to this really profound and honestly tragic irony. This whole journey, which usually starts with wanting a better, more connected life for your family, can end in the deepest kind of loneliness imaginable.
And guess what? The cycle doesn't stop. That comparison game just keeps going, even at the very, very top. You get bubbles within bubbles. The people who are only millionaires find themselves shut out from the billionaires' circles. There's always a higher peak, always a more exclusive party you're not invited to.
And this is the final, devastating punchline. You spend a lifetime building a fortune, only to look around and realize that maybe all your relationships are just transactional. People either want something from you or they're judging you for what you have. Those genuine connections you used to have, they've just vanished.
And all of this leaves us with a question that's as old as time itself. It's one that really forces us to think about what a rich life truly means, and maybe what we're actually giving up in the race to gain the whole world.
We all like to think of love as this magical thing, right? All about connection and shared dreams. But what if I told you that one of the biggest factors in who you end up with is, well, money? It's kind of uncomfortable to think about, but today we're going to dive into how our finances secretly steer one of the most important choices we'll ever make. And you know, this isn't some new 21st century idea. Nope. Check out this quote from way back in 1545. It's basically just a super old-timey way of saying birds of a flock flock together. This idea that we stick with people who are like us, it's been around for centuries.
So there's actually a fancy sociological term for this whole thing, homogamy. It's just our natural tendency to marry someone who's, well, like us. Someone with a similar education, similar background, and yeah, a similar amount of money. And it's not just a harmless preference, you know? This is a powerful force that kind of keeps social classes locked in place, generation after generation.
And the numbers on this are, honestly, pretty wild. Just look at this. A study found that a whopping 71% of college grads marry other college grads. It's a pattern you can't unsee once you know it's there. Doctors marry doctors, lawyers marry lawyers. It's this invisible force that keeps these social and economic bubbles intact.
Okay, so that's the norm. But what happens when someone just smashes that pattern to pieces? What happens when a sparrow marries a billionaire? When two people from totally different financial worlds try to make it work?
All right, let's get into it. First up, what happens right away when these worlds collide? Because believe me, the problems can start from day one. This is a perfect example. James Everingham, he was one of the guys who got rich from the Netscape IPO. And he said, literally, the day after the IPO, he suddenly became way more attractive. He even overheard a woman he was about to date say he needed help spending his money. I mean, can you imagine? Just like that, boom, trust is gone. How do you ever really know why someone is with you when your bank account is that big?
And this problem doesn't stop once you're married. It can actually get worse. So let's talk about this guy, Michael. He's a PhD student, comes from a super wealthy family, and he marries a woman from a working class background. So what do his parents do? They buy them a house. Sounds amazing, right? A free house? Yeah, not so much. What was supposed to be a gift turned into a total burden. For Michael, he felt emasculated. I mean, he's living in a house his dad bought him, not one he earned. And for his wife, it got weird. She developed this sense of entitlement. Like, well, if your parents can buy us a house, why can't they pay for a 5-star vacation? The whole dynamic got completely warped.
And this is the real kicker, what Michael said at the end of it all. The money just poisoned everything. He felt like it turned both of them into monsters, into people they didn't even recognize anymore. So, those are the immediate problems. But these things can snowball into something even bigger over time. We're talking about a real price you pay, and that price can be your entire identity.
Think about it. For the partner who has less money, their ambition can just disappear. I mean, why would you bust your butt working 80 hours a week when your salary is basically pocket change compared to your spouse's trust fund? The novelist Gary Shteyngart saw this all the time. Hedge fund guys marrying these incredibly promising women who then just stopped. They got taken off the market, as he put it. Your drive just gets swallowed up by all that comfort. But hey, not everyone falls into that trap. Take this woman, Elizabeth. She's a big shot exec in Silicon Valley, and she actually called off 2 engagements to guys who were way wealthier than her. Why? Because she realized if she married them, her whole life would just become their life. Her friends, her job, everything gone. She'd be living in their world. And for her, that was a price she was not willing to pay. And let's be clear, this is a two-way street. It's not just tough on the poorer partner. For the super rich, all that money can be like a giant wall, blocking them from finding a real connection. There's this story about a client's daughter. She's 33, has $100 million, and she's already on her 3rd marriage. She just wants to find someone who loves her for her. But the money, it complicates everything. Wow. And this quote from an heiress named Marfa just hits so hard. A friend told her she was the whole package, smart, pretty, and rich. And Marfa was just disgusted. She said the thought that her money was part of what made her attractive, it made her skin crawl. Imagine feeling like the thing everyone else wants is the ugliest part of you. So you've got this massive, complicated problem. If you're super rich, what do? Well, you do what you always do. You throw money at it. You outsource it. You hire someone to find love for you. And that brings us to Janice Spindle. She runs a company called Serious Matchmaking. And yeah, she doesn't pull any punches. She calls her service the Rolls-Royce or the Bentley of matchmaking. We're not talking about your average millionaire here. Her clients are the guys on the Forbes 400 list, the ones with the private jets, the yachts, the whole shebang. And the price tag? Oh, it matches the clientele. Her top service, the Global VIP package, can run you over $1 million. Yeah, $1 million. For that, she'll literally hop on a private jet and scour the globe to find you a spouse. It's a whole other world. So, what does $1 million match get you? What's on the wish list? According to Janice, her clients want the entire package. She has this thing called the 4 Bs: beauty, brains, body, and balance. It's a very, very specific checklist. But honestly, the list of deal breakers is maybe even more telling. Tattoos or piercings? Nope. Obvious gold diggers? Out. And then there's this quote from Spindle herself. Her clients have an allergy to fat. I mean, it's a process that is incredibly specific and, let's be real, incredibly superficial. Okay, so you're probably thinking what I'm thinking, right? This whole thing sounds like she's finding women for men. So why doesn't she have rich women as clients looking for a partner?
Well, she was asked that question, and her answer is something else. She said, and this is a direct quote, "It's because they're needy. They're annoying. You can never satisfy them. All I do is scream at them." Just wow. It's a pretty jaw-dropping statement, and it says a lot about the kind of traditional, maybe even outdated dynamics going on in this super elite world.
All right, so let's fast forward. A match has been made, whether through $1 million service or just, by chance. An heir is bringing home a commoner. The next call they make isn't to the wedding planner, it's to the lawyers. These wealthy families have a playbook, a kind of family defense plan. Step 1, hire a private investigator to do a deep dive on the new partner. We're talking skeletons in the closet, past relationships, everything. Step 2, they go to their lawyers and change the family trust to basically build a wall around the money so the new spouse can't touch it. And step 3, the big one, you absolutely will sign an ironclad prenup. It's not a negotiation, it's a financial fortress. Which brings us to the final, really uncomfortable question. When you've got private investigators vetting your fiancé and lawyers building financial walls around your relationship, when a family fortune is on the line, did love ever really stand a chance in the first place?
All right, today we're going somewhere interesting. We're taking a look inside the world of the ultra-wealthy. But we're not talking about their jets or their mansions. No, we're talking about their fear and the incredible, almost unbelievable systems they build just to feel safe.
This quote right here from Robert Kiyosaki, man, it is the key to this whole thing. It's a paradox. And we're about to see it play out in some pretty extreme ways. Just keep this idea in the back of your mind as we go.
Okay, so let's just think about this for a second. Your nanny, she can handle a diaper blowout, and she can also handle a physical threat. I mean, come on, that sounds like the plot of a Hollywood movie, right? But for some of the world's richest families, this isn't fiction. This is a real job description. And that's where this wild idea of the nanny guard comes in. It's this fascinating hybrid role, and it was born from a very specific problem that, let's be honest, only the super rich really have. See, here's the problem they're trying to solve. A traditional nanny or a caregiver, as much as you trust them, can be a huge security risk. You know, they might accidentally post a picture on social media that gives away the family's location. The nanny guard completely flips that. They turn that liability into an asset. They become the family's first line of defense, and they're just seamlessly blended right into daily life.
And this is where it gets wild. Look at this skill set. Yeah, you've got the stuff you'd expect, like physical combat and tactical route planning for, the school run. You've got behavioral intelligence, being able to read a room and spot a threat before it happens. But then you get to my personal favorite, photo-bombing paparazzi. I'm not kidding. They are literally trained to jump in front of a camera to ruin a shot of the client's kid. It's this incredible mix of childcare and covert ops.
But look, a nanny guard, that's just a symptom. To really get what's going on here, we have to look at the disease, and that is the profound, almost unbelievable isolation that this kind of extreme wealth creates.
And you know what? This isn't some new 21st century problem. Not at all. Go back over 100 years to the first Gilded Age. Andrew Carnegie was writing about this exact same thing. He saw how massive wealth creates these rigid castes, and how that leads to mutual distrust between the rich and, well, everyone else.
This slide just lays it out so perfectly, right? It shows the two kinds of barriers these families put up. On one side, you've got the literal walls, the fences, the cameras, the bodyguards, pretty obvious. But then, and this is maybe even more important, you have the figurative walls, the layers of PR people, the super exclusive social circles, the staff that are trained to keep the outside world at a very, very safe distance. So, what are they so afraid of? What's lurking on the other side of all those walls that makes them spend millions on security? Let's break down the anatomy of this upper-class fear.
And the list of threats, it's all over the map. You've got your classic Hollywood fears, right? Stalkers and trespassers. You've got insiders, like a disgruntled employee or a mistress. But then you have the really modern stuff, like somebody trying to blackmail you over your kids' leaked photos, or just the constant noise from social media haters. And then there's this big, scary, undefined cloud hanging over everything: civil unrest.
And here's a really crucial thing to understand. Most people don't just wake up one morning and decide to build a fortress. It's almost always a reaction. Something specific has to happen. A scary story on the news, a neighbor getting broken into, a direct threat, something that makes that abstract fear feel very, very real.
And reacting to that fear, well, it isn't cheap. I want you to just let this number sink in for a second. To protect one family 24/7 with the whole shebang, estate security, logistics, drivers, you're looking at $1.5 to $2 million. That's not a one-time cost. That's every single year.
Okay, so you take that level of fear, you combine it with basically unlimited money, and what do you get? Well, your home stops being a home. It transforms into a fortress, a billionaire bunker.
Let's just start with the safe room, and forget about some reinforced closet in the basement. A custom-built, luxury safe room can cost between $200,000 and $500,000. For perspective, that's more than the entire price of an average house in many parts of the U.S. for a single room.
So what does $500,000 get you?
Well, the standard package is pretty intense. You've got bomb-resistant doors, blast-proof Kevlar plating that can stop bullets from an AK-47, and even air filtration systems in case of a biological or chemical attack. Some clients don't even want visible fences, so they bury sensors around the property line instead.
But of course, it doesn't stop there, because the paranoia always escalates. For families living in remote areas where it might take police a while to show up, the next logical step is an escape tunnel.
And then it just gets even more layered. You start getting requests for safe rooms inside of other safe rooms. It's like a Russian doll of paranoia, a fortified closet with a secret door that leads to an even smaller, even more secure space.
But the craziest request?
The one that even the security guys had to push back on. A client wanted a sniper's nest built into his attic, his actual attic, so he could, and I quote, get the guys coming up the driveway. They talked him out of that one.
And if you want a story that just perfectly captures the wild psychology of all this, this is it. One of the security firm's clients had them turn his giant wine cellar into a ballistic-proof stronghold. Why? His reasoning was just perfect in a dark kind of way. He figured if the end was coming, he wanted to go out drunk.
So we've seen the crazy tech, we've seen the millions of dollars, but what's the actual human cost of living like this? What's it really like to grow up and live inside one of these gilded cages?
This quote, it's from someone online who says they grew up in this exact environment, and it's just heartbreaking. They wrote that seeing all the cameras and sensors in your own house, your bedroom, your bathroom, it isn't reassuring. It's an ever-present screaming reminder that you live in danger, that you're different.
And you can imagine the tension this creates in a family, right? The security experts say that the patriarch, he often loves the convenience of it all, having drivers and logistics all handled. But the spouse, and especially the teenagers, they can deeply, deeply resent the constant surveillance. It makes having a normal life basically impossible.
And this is really what it all boils down to. This is the central trade-off. The goal is security, peace of mind, safety for your family, but the price you pay is your freedom. The cost is constant surveillance, a total loss of privacy, and giving up any chance of living a truly normal life.
Which leaves us right back where we started, with that fundamental question. When you spend millions to build a fortress to keep the entire world out, have you actually made yourself safe? Or have you just built the world's most beautiful, most expensive prison and trapped yourself inside?
The price of privilege. It sounds intriguing, right? We're all taught to dream of a life with absolutely no limits. But what if that dream is actually kind of a nightmare? Today, we're going to dig into the hidden struggles of the super rich and what happens when having everything, well, costs you everything. You know, Frank Ocean really hit on something here. This idea of being a super rich kid with, quote, nothing but fake friends. It's this surprising sense of emptiness, of being totally isolated, right at the very top. And that feeling? It's exactly what we're going to see reflected in some pretty shocking research. So, that brings us to the big question. We all dream of having it all. I mean, who doesn't? But what if it costs everything? That's what we're exploring today, the hidden personal price tag that comes with a life of unbelievable wealth.
All right, so first up, what are rich parents actually afraid of? To really get what the kids are going through, you've got to start with their parents' fears. And trust me, what the research shows, it's probably not what you're thinking. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just wrap our heads around the kind of money we're talking about here. The families in this Boston College study had an average household wealth of $75 million. Yeah, this isn't just rich. This is a whole other world, a level of wealth that's kind of hard to even imagine.
And this is where things get really fascinating. If I asked you what you think super rich parents worry about most, you'd probably say, oh, that their kids will be spoiled brats, right? That's the common idea. But the reality? It's completely different. Their number one fear is that their kids will be misunderstood, isolated, and even demonized because of their wealth. Basically, they're afraid their kids will go through the same social pain that they did.
So, how does that parental fear actually affect a kid's life?
Well, let's zoom in on one personal story. We'll call him Michael. His story is a perfect example of how a life inside this gilded cage can go so wrong. And here's the devastating cycle he got trapped in. Step 1, his parents just deposit thousands of dollars into his account every month. No conversation, just money appearing. Sounds great, right? But step 2, he never learns any discipline. He spends everything, and even after a decade of six-figure jobs, he has nothing saved. Then comes step 3, the secret debt. He's hiding student loans, maxed out credit cards from his own family. And all of this leads to the real core of the problem, step 4, this deep underlying shame. He feels like a fraud, like he hasn't actually earned any part of his life.
You know, there's actually a name for this kind of thing. A family wealth advisor called it drone parenting. Think about it. It's like using all your money and connections like a high-tech drone to fly ahead of your kid, map out their entire life, and just eliminate any obstacle, any potential failure from their path.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. As Thayer Watts points out, When you shield your kids from every hardship, you're also robbing them of the one thing they need to actually grow: failure. They don't get to mess up, learn from it, and pick themselves back up. And without that, they never really figure out how to build their own identity or get a real sense of self-worth. And look, Michael's story is heartbreaking, but it's not a one-off. It's actually part of a much bigger, more shocking trend that researchers are calling the affluence affliction. This is where the data gets really eye-opening.
What's wild is that the researcher Sunia Luthar, she wasn't even looking for this. She was actually studying kids in low-income urban areas. But for her study, she needed a control group, right? So she picked a school in a super wealthy suburb. And what she found there, well, it completely blindsided her and ended up changing everything.
Get ready for this because it is staggering. What she found was that the kids from these rich families had diagnosed drug and alcohol addiction problems at 2 to 3 times the national average. Let me say that again. 2 to 3 times. This isn't just a small blip on a chart. This is a full-blown crisis hiding in plain sight. So what on earth is going on here? Why is this happening? Well, it's basically a perfect storm. You've got this insane pressure from parents to achieve, to be the best, but at the same time, because those parents have such busy schedules, there's often not a lot of actual supervision. Add in easy access to cash and alcohol, and you see where this is going. A lot of these kids are self-medicating to deal with all the anxiety and depression. It even gets to the point where there's a whole culture of cheating just to keep up the appearance of success. Okay, so we've seen the personal stories, we've seen the shocking data. Now, we need to zoom out and ask a much bigger question. What is the true cost of this kind of privilege? Not just for the individuals, but for all of us, for society as a whole. I think the entrepreneur Nick Hanauer said it best. He talks about how extreme economic inequality isn't just a benign thing. It fundamentally warps society. It's like it grabs the ladder of opportunity and just stretches the rungs farther and farther apart, making it almost impossible for anyone else to get a foothold and climb. Now, let's be really clear about something. The point of all this isn't to make you pity the rich. That's not it at all. The point is to understand that the very system that creates this extreme wealth, it also creates these hidden side effects: the isolation, the pressure, the addiction. And those problems don't just stay inside the mansion walls. They have real consequences that affect everyone. So it all comes down to this one final question. When you build a fortress of wealth and privilege around your kids, are you building a wall to protect them? Or are you actually building a cage that ends up imprisoning them? You know, getting into an elite college in America has basically become an arms race. The stakes could not be higher. And let's be honest, it's a competition where the wealthiest families often have the most powerful weapons. So let's dive right in and take a look inside the system that decides who gets one of those coveted spots. So get this. That was a joke someone overheard during a tour of a super prestigious private high school in California. A parent actually asked if the headmaster's son was unemployed, and the whole room just laughed. Why? Because the very idea was just absurd. It's a tiny moment, right? But it perfectly captures this whole world of privilege and expectation that really defines this race from the very beginning. To really wrap our heads around this landscape, we have to look at two vastly different worlds that exist right next to each other. On one side, you've got the elite private school, and on the other, you've got your typical urban public school. Okay, so let's take a peek into a place like Head Royce. Honestly, this is less like a high school and more like a miniature university. I mean, we're talking about courses in neurobiology and robotics, school-sponsored trips to Greece to study the Syrian refugee crisis, and here's the kicker: extensive one-on-one college counseling from people who used to be admissions officers at places like Stanford and Penn. It is a completely different world. And this right here shows one of the biggest divides. At an elite private school, a counselor might have just 30 students. They get to know every single one of them. But at a public school like Oakland Tech, that same counselor is responsible for almost 400 kids. There's just no way they can provide that kind of personalized coaching. You know the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and sadly, a lot of students just fall through the cracks. So why all this pressure? I mean, why are parents dropping tens of thousands of dollars a year on high school? Well, it's because the prize at the finish line is a ticket to a totally different kind of life. Let's take a look at what a degree from a top university is actually worth. Look, we all know that any college degree gives you a nice pay bump over just a high school diploma. But an elite degree, That is a whole different ballgame. About 10 years after starting college, the median income for top earners from what they call an Ivy Plus school, that's the Ivy League plus places like Stanford, MIT, is around $200,000. Compare that to just $70,000 for top earners from other colleges. It's a truly life-altering financial advantage. Now, here's a number that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about. 60%. Just let that sink in for a second. What do you think this represents?
So what that 60% means is this. These elite schools are incredibly powerful engines for upward mobility. If you're a student from a low-income family and you get into one of these schools, you have a 60% chance of vaulting into the highest income bracket. This makes access to these places a huge issue of fairness and opportunity.
And here's the massive contradiction. The very institutions that are the best at creating opportunity are overwhelmingly filled with students who need it the least. Get this, kids from the top 1% are 77 times more likely to go to an Ivy Plus college than kids from the bottom 20%. It's a truly shocking statistic.
But you see, this isn't just about high school. The advantages for wealthy families start stacking up from the moment a child is born. This race begins much, much earlier than you think. One of the biggest tools out there is something called the 529 College Savings Plan. Now, anyone can open one, and the money you put in grows tax-free, which is great. But the way the rules are set up, it gives a much, much bigger benefit to people who are already wealthy. So a tax break that's supposed to help everyone ends up disproportionately subsidizing the education of the rich.
So let's imagine two kids, Eleanor and Nigel. Eleanor's middle-class family puts away $6,000 a year. By the time she's ready for college, they've got over $200,000 saved up, and they've received a taxpayer subsidy of about $17,000. Not bad. But Nigel's wealthy parents, they can dump $150,000 into his account right after he's born. By college, his fund is worth almost $700,000, and his family got a subsidy of over $116,000. That's almost 7 times more than Eleanor's family.
So Nigel shows up to the application process with a better-funded education and a massive college fund already in the bank. But the advantages don't stop there, not by a long shot. The admission system itself has several totally legal built-in tracks that overwhelmingly favor students just like him.
There are 3 really big ones. First, you've got the feeder schools, these elite high schools that have like a direct pipeline to the Ivies. Second is legacy status. If your parents went there, you get a huge leg up. And third, maybe the most powerful of all, is donor influence. If your family can afford to fund a new library, well, you're not just another applicant, you're on a very special list. Let's just zoom in on that legacy advantage for a moment with another powerful number, 34%.
Okay, so at a place like Harvard, if your mom or dad is an alum, your chance of getting in is 34%. For literally everyone else, it's 6%. That one single factor, which has absolutely nothing to do with your own merit, makes you more than 5 times as likely to get in. And no surprise, money talks even louder. The acceptance rate for kids on the dean's interest list, who are often the children of major donors, is a staggering 42%. You might remember the story about how Charles Kushner pledged $2.5 million to Harvard right around the time his son Jared was applying. Jared, whose grades reportedly weren't typical for a Harvard admit, well, he got in.
But what happens when you have all these advantages, the private school, the savings, the family connections, and your kid's application still isn't quite good enough? Well, for some families, that's when they decide to go nuclear. They cheat. The Operation Varsity Blues scandal was the most insane example of this. Wealthy parents paid a consultant millions of dollars to bribe coaches and cheat on the SATs. I mean, they were turning their kids into fake athletes, literally photoshopping their faces onto pictures of actual water polo players. It was a level of fraud that just showed how far some people are willing to go in this high-stakes game.
All of these inequalities were already baked right into the system. But then a global crisis hit, and, as we're about to see, it didn't level the playing field at all. If anything, it blew the gap between the haves and the have-nots wide open.
Just look at the 2 different realities of the pandemic. On the public school side, they were scrambling just to get kids meals and make sure they had Wi-Fi. Meanwhile, private schools, where every kid already had a laptop and the classes were tiny, they switched to remote learning almost overnight. They kept giving out letter grades, while public schools switched to pass/fail. The level of personal attention was just remarkable. This quote from a private school parent really just says it all. He said that during the crisis, he saw the advantages his kids had just multiply dramatically. And his reaction was this mix of gratitude that his kids were okay and supported, relief that they weren't falling behind, and then guilt, because he knew that millions of other kids were. And that really brings us back to the core question that this whole system raises. When you look at the resources, the tiny classes, the dedicated counseling, all these incredible opportunities that are available to just a select few, it just leaves you wondering, why can't every kid have this? Have you ever wondered if getting rich actually changes a person? I don't just mean their lifestyle, but something deeper. Their personality, their ethics, their ability to feel for other people. It's a huge question. And what's wild is that some of the most startling answers have come from, of all things, a simple game of Monopoly. So let's get into it. All right, so let's just put the big question right on the table. Does having more money fundamentally change how we behave? Does it make us less generous, maybe more entitled, or is the whole picture a lot more complicated than that? A psychologist named Paul Piff has spent his career digging into this, and trust me, what he found is pretty fascinating. So our story starts, believe it or not, with a game of Monopoly. But this was no ordinary family game night, okay? This was a very carefully designed experiment, all to see what happens when you give one person a massive, totally unearned advantage over someone else. Okay, so picture this. Over at his lab, Piff brings in pairs of strangers to play Monopoly. We're talking 100 games, 200 different students. They're told it's just a regular game, but before they even roll the dice, a single coin gets tossed. And that one simple flip of a coin, well, it changed absolutely everything. And we're not talking about a small change here. This game was totally rigged. The rich player, chosen by that random coin flip, started with double the money. They collected double the salary every time they passed go. And get this, they got to roll 2 dice, while the poor player only got to roll 1. They even got the cool car token, leaving the other player with the old boot. The whole game was set up for one person to just completely dominate. And the changes in behavior were, well, they were almost immediate and kind of shocking. The rich players started moving their pieces around the board with more force, literally slamming them down. They got louder, they started talking down to their opponents. Researchers saw them physically take up more space, leaning back in their chairs. And, my favorite detail, they even ate way more pretzels from a shared bowl that was put on the table. In just 15 minutes, these regular students turned into caricatures of rich people. Okay, but you're probably thinking, come on, a Monopoly game is just a game, right? That's the real question. Do these patterns actually show up in the real world? So Piff and his team decided to take their research out of the lab and onto the streets to find out. One of their most famous studies was brilliantly simple. They just watched a crosswalk to see which kinds of cars would stop for a pedestrian trying to cross the street. And the results? They were stark. Drivers in cheaper economy cars were way more likely to stop and let the person cross. But as the value of the car went up, the driver's willingness to stop for a pedestrian went way down. And it wasn't just on the road. This pattern of self-interest popped up again and again. In another lab study, this one called the dictator game, people were given points they could trade for cash, and they had the choice to share some with a stranger in need. The participants with the highest incomes? They gave away 44% fewer points than the people in the lowest income bracket. But Piff's team wanted to go even deeper than just behavior. They wanted to measure the actual feeling of compassion. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it turns out there's a biological marker for it. When we feel compassion for someone, our heart rate actually slows down. It's a physiological response that kind of prepares our body to connect and help. So they hooked people up to heart rate monitors and showed them a video of children with cancer. The lower wealth participants didn't just say they felt more compassion, their bodies showed it. Their heart rate slowed down significantly. The higher wealth participants, on the other hand, their bodies showed almost no change at all. So at this point, it's pretty tempting to just say, case closed, money makes you less compassionate. But not so fast. The research actually reveals this really surprising and kind of challenging twist. The story, it turns out, is a bit more complicated. Let's look at 2 classic ethical dilemmas. First, you've got the trolley problem. A runaway trolley is about to kill 5 people. You can pull a lever, which diverts it onto another track where it will kill 1 person. It's an impersonal choice. Then you have the footbridge dilemma. Same runaway trolley, same 5 people.
But this time, the only way to stop it is to physically push a large stranger off a bridge into its path, killing them. This choice is deeply personal and visceral. Now, for most of us, pulling the lever feels like a tough, but probably acceptable choice. But actually pushing someone to their death with your own hands? Yeah, that feels completely different, morally wrong. Even though the math, 1 death to save 5, is exactly the same. Okay, so here's the kicker. When it came to the impersonal choice of pulling the lever, socioeconomic status made no difference at all. But in that highly personal, emotional footbridge dilemma, the higher income individuals were way more willing to push the stranger. Now, researchers think this might point to a mindset that's more capable of making cold, dispassionate, utilitarian choices for what they see as the greater good.
All right, now let's circle all the way back to that rigged Monopoly game. Because you could argue that the most telling part of that entire experiment wasn't what happened during the game, but what the players said after it was all over. So after 15 minutes of this completely lopsided game, the researchers stopped everything and asked the players a really simple question. Why did the rich player win so easily? And here it is. This is the punchline of the whole thing. Even though the game was so obviously and blatantly rigged in their favor from the start, the rich players talked about their win as if they had earned it. They went on and on about their brilliant strategy, their smart property buys, and their clever moves. They completely rationalized their success, ignoring the massive, unearned advantage they were handed by a coin toss. And this right here shows us something so profound about how our minds work. We have this incredibly powerful need to make sense of our lives. When we do well, our default is to think it's because of our own skill and hard work, even when outside factors like pure luck or privilege played a huge part. We basically internalize our own advantage. Now, this tendency can lead to what psychologists call essentialist beliefs. It's a fancy term for a simple idea, the belief that the differences between groups of people, like social classes, aren't because of their circumstances, but because they are somehow inherent, fixed, and maybe even biological. It's the idea that some people are just born smarter or harder working, and that's why the world is the way it is. And you can see how this creates a kind of psychological feedback loop, right? First, you experience some success or privilege. Then your brain attributes that success to your own skills and merit. After a while, you start to see the resulting inequality as fair, as deserved. And then you might even start to believe that these class differences are just the natural order of things, not a result of circumstance at all. So why does any of this matter? It's a rigged board game, a few lab tests. Why are we talking about it? Because these psychological tendencies, they don't just stay in the lab. They scale up, and they have huge implications for our entire society. When we start to internalize our own advantages and see inequality as something that's deserved, it can create these deep, deep social divides. We end up retreating into our own bubbles with people just like us, and that can create a really strong us versus them mentality, where we just have less understanding or empathy for people in different situations. And that becomes a massive problem when one of those groups holds most of the power. Right? If the people making the big decisions about our economy, about our laws, about our society, are working from a psychological place that justifies their own position and sees inequality as natural, well, that affects everybody. Which really just leaves us with this one final thought to chew on. We all like to think that we're the captains of our own ship, that our choices and our values are 100% our own. But this research forces us to ask a tough question. What if the world we're born into, our own personal version of that coin toss, is actually shaping our minds, our empathy, and how we see the world, way more than we could ever possibly imagine? So, have you ever looked at Washington, D.C. and just felt like it's on a completely different planet? You know, when the policies they pass just don't seem to line up with what most people actually want? Well, today, we're going to dig into the one invisible force that might just explain all of it: big money. Okay, check this out. There are 2 things that are important in politics. The first is money. I can't remember what the second is. That was from Senator Mark Hanna, and get this, he said it way back in 1898. It's pretty cynical, right? But he was pointing to a fundamental truth about how power works. And the big question for us right now is he still right? I mean, it's a question that can drive you crazy, can it? You see the polls, and they show this huge public support for an idea. And then, crickets. Nothing happens. Or even worse, lawmakers go and do the complete opposite. So why? Well, the answer might be a lot simpler and maybe a little more chilling than you'd think. It could all come down to one simple thing: whose phone calls get returned in Washington. All right, Section 1, A Tale of Two Citizens. To really get this, we've got to look at how political access in America is basically a tale of two different worlds. Because, let me tell you, the experience is not the same for everyone. It's not even in the same ballpark. And this is really where that story splits right down the middle. So a couple of studies looked into this. For the wealthiest Americans, a whopping 40% of them had been in touch with a federal lawmaker in just the last 6 months. Now let's flip that. For the general public, it was only 16% in the last 5 years. Think about that. 6 months versus 5 years. That's not a gap. That is a massive, massive canyon. So you can see it right here on the chart. It's just a huge disparity. For one group, talking to your representative is, just part of the routine. It's an expectation. For pretty much everyone else, it's a once-in-a-blue-moon kind of event. And it's not just about civic duty. A lot of the time, these calls are about protecting their own financial interests. So, okay, the big question is, does this gap in access actually matter? Well, according to political scientist Martin Gilens, it's everything. I mean, his research is pretty stunning. He found that when the wealthy and the rest of Americans disagree on something, the policies that actually become law, they almost always reflect what the affluent want. And what the poor and middle class want? It has, and I'm quoting here, virtually no relationship to the outcome. Wow. Okay, so we've established that the wealthy have way more access and that this access translates into real influence. But how does it work? I mean, what's the actual mechanism here? That brings us to our next section, the currency of influence. For a lot of people, the path to real access looks exactly like this. Step 1. You get an invite to a fancy political fundraiser. Step 2, you're there chatting with a lawmaker over cocktails. Step 3, you write a nice big check for their campaign. And then step 4, boom, suddenly you're the person whose call gets returned. One tech exec even said he went from just watching characters in movies who could call a senator to literally being that guy himself. That's the transaction, plain and simple. And what's the most toxic combination in all of this? Well, according to lawmakers themselves, it's when you combine lobbying with fundraising. One representative said, look, a lobbyist coming to my office to make their case, that's one thing. But when that same person is asking for a campaign check at a fundraiser while they're pitching you their idea, that's when things get really dangerous. That's when simple access hardens into real solid influence over the laws that affect every single one of us. So let's see how this all plays out in the real world. We're going to do a little case study. And the stakes here are, they're in the billions of dollars. Let's talk about the tax bills. Okay. First, I just want you to look at this number. $6,243. Just let that sink in for a second. Any guesses what that represents? That was the number of lobbyists who swarmed Capitol Hill to work on just one bill, the 2017 tax cut bill. Let's put that in perspective. That's more than 11 lobbyists for every single member of Congress. The pressure was just off the charts. One congressman at the time said his donors were literally telling him, get it done or don't ever call me again. So, what did all that lobbying get them? Well, for one thing, they successfully protected loopholes like carried interest. Now, this is basically a tax loophole that lets super wealthy investment managers pay a much lower tax rate than most people. Even the president at the time had called for closing it. But the lobbyists fought hard, and guess what? They won. The loophole stayed. And listen, this wasn't some one-off thing. Remember the CARES Act back in 2020, the huge pandemic relief bill? Well, tucked away inside of it were $161 billion in tax breaks that mostly went to the richest Americans. $161 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the bill gave to all state and local governments combined. And it's more than the aid for hospitals in the middle of a massive public health crisis. So the question is, how did we even get here? I mean, a system like this doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. To really understand it, we've got to look at how the rules of the game have been written and rewritten over the decades. For a long, long time, the key was this thing called soft money. See, you couldn't give unlimited money directly to a candidate, but you could give unlimited cash to the political parties for vague stuff like party-building activities. It was a giant loophole. And by 2002, this soft money spending had exploded to almost $500 million. One DC insider just flat out called it legalized bribery. And for a little while there, it looked like things might change. In 2002, the McCain-Feingold Act actually banned this soft money, but that victory was short-lived. Because in 2010, the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision came along and just blew the doors wide open again. The court ruled that corporations spending money on political ads was basically a form of free speech. And that decision led to the rise of super PACs, these groups that can take in unlimited contributions. And just like that, big money came roaring back, maybe louder than ever before.
You can imagine how the people who fought for that reform felt. Senator Russ Feingold, one of the guys behind that original bill, did not mince words. He said, "We are now in a robber baron era on steroids." And I think everybody can see it. A robber baron era on steroids. That's a pretty powerful statement about where we are now.
So what's the actual cost of all this? I mean, what happens to a democracy when the wealthiest citizens want one thing, the general public wants something totally different, and only one of those voices is really being heard? This last section is all about that, getting the balance right. And make no mistake, the priorities are wildly different. Just look at this. The public wants stronger environmental protections. The top 1% wants to cut them. A staggering 88% of the public says spend whatever it takes for good schools. Only about a third of the wealthiest agree. You can go down the list, Social Security, jobs, you name it, and you see this huge, massive divide between what the public wants and what the most influential donors want. And it turns out the influence isn't just coming from the outside. A really fascinating study from Yale found that a politician's own personal wealth can actually impact how they vote. Now, for Republicans, wealth didn't seem to change their vote much, but for Democrats, the wealthier ones were actually much less likely to support bills that were designed to reduce inequality compared to their colleagues who weren't as rich. And this really brings us back to that quote from Representative Tom Malinowski. He says, "The story of America is about how to get the balance right." His point is that, look, the whole American project has always been about striving for that balance, trying to make sure that opportunity isn't just something that's reserved for the people who are already rich and powerful. And that really leaves us with the central question, doesn't it? In a system that seems so tilted, so heavily weighted by money and access, what does it actually take to get that balance right? How do we build a system where every single citizen's voice has a real shot at being heard? That's the challenge to think about as we wrap this up.
So, what if I told you that most of what we think we know about wealth in America is, well, just flat out wrong? Today, we're going to dig into the shocking reality of wealth inequality using data from a really fascinating study and the book Jackpot by Michael Mechanic.
Okay, to really get to the bottom of this, let's start with a simple but powerful experiment. Economists Dan Ariely and Michael Norton went to over 5,500 Americans and asked them a pretty profound question. If you could build a society from the ground up, what would a fair distribution of wealth actually look like? And this is what they came up with. Just take a look at this chart. In their perfect world, the richest 20% would have about 32% of the money, sure, but the poorest 20% would still have a decent 15% slice of the pie. It's not, perfect equality, but it's so much more balanced. And you know what's really amazing? This wasn't a political thing. Democrats and Republicans, they pretty much came up with the same ideal society.
But this is where the story takes a turn. Because there is a massive difference between that ideal, what people guessed the reality was, and what the numbers actually are. On average, people figured the top 20% owned maybe 59% of the wealth. The reality? Oh, it's not even close.
Here it is. The staggering truth. That top 20%, they don't own 59% of the wealth. They own a whopping 84%. Let that sink in. That means everybody else, 80% of the country, is left to fight over just 16% of the pie. It's a level of inequality that's almost hard to wrap your head around. And if you thought that was bad, somehow it gets even worse. People guess that the bottom 40%, that's a huge chunk of the population, owned about 9% of the wealth. The actual number? A mere 0.3%. We're talking about 125 million people with practically zero economic breathing room.
So, you have to ask, how in the world did we get here? Well, the data tells a story of a rocket ship that took off for the stars, but only a tiny, tiny fraction of us were actually on board.
This chart from economists Saz and Zuckman just says it all. Look at this thing. It's basically a flat line for almost everybody. And then, right at the very end, in the last few percentiles, it just shoots straight up. It goes vertical. That's the rocket ship.
Now, let's zoom in a little bit, get a look inside that rocket ship. This chart tracks wealth growth going all the way back to 1970.
That bottom line, that's pretty much everyone else, and they're going nowhere fast. The middle line, that's the top 10%, and they're doing all right. But that top line, whoa, that's the 1%, and they are playing in a completely different galaxy. And believe it or not, it doesn't even stop there. This chart is like one of those Russian nesting dolls of inequality. We're now looking inside the 1%. That bottom line is your average millionaire. The top line, that's the top 0.01%. The source material puts it perfectly. It's not just that the rich are getting richer. The insanely rich are leaving everyone else, even the regular rich, completely in the dust.
You know, this might feel like a new problem, but it's not. Over 200 years ago, founding father John Adams totally saw this coming. He actually warned Thomas Jefferson that wealth is like a snowball. Once it gets rolling downhill, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger on its own.
So what is it? What's the fuel for this runaway snowball? Well, it isn't magic. It's really a series of very specific choices we've made over the years about how we structure our entire economy.
A huge piece of this puzzle is tax policy. See, before the 1980s, when the economy grew, the stock market grew. It made sense. But then, a whole series of tax cuts, especially for the wealthiest, completely changed the game. All of a sudden, it was way more profitable to just shovel money to shareholders than to, say, invest in your company or your workers. And the result? Between 1989 and 2017, almost half, 43%, of market growth had nothing to do with the real economy growing. It was just financial engineering.
After decades of these kinds of policies, we've ended up in this bizarre reality where the 400 richest Americans now pay a lower overall tax rate than the bottom half of the entire country. Just think about that for a second. The people with the absolute most are contributing the least, at least percentage-wise.
So you're probably asking, how is that even possible? Well, it really boils down to a three-part strategy. First, the super rich don't get paychecks like you and me. They make their money from investments, and those are taxed at a much lower rate. Second, they have teams of lawyers and accountants whose only job is to exploit every single loophole in the tax code. And third, a lot of the things they spend their money on, like private jet travel or fancy club memberships, are often exempt from the sales taxes that the rest of us pay every single day.
And let's just talk about some of these loopholes because they are wild. The source material is just full of these jaw-dropping examples. You want to buy a supercar and not pay any sales tax? Easy. Just set up a fake shell company in Montana. Buying a super yacht? No problem. Just fly your lawyers out to international waters on a helicopter to sign the papers. It's like a completely different world with a totally different set of rules.
Okay, so we've seen the mind-bending reality of the wealth gap and how we got here. But now we get to the most important question of all. So what? What does this actually mean for you, for me, for everybody else? In our final section, we're going to get into the real-world consequences of this whole thing.
And here's the brutal truth. While the wealthy were on that rocket ship to the moon, the bottom half of American workers have basically been stuck on the launch pad, not moving. When you adjust for inflation, the average worker in the bottom 50% actually made less money in 2019 than they did 40 years earlier in 1980. That is just stunning.
And here is maybe the cruelest irony in all of this. Being poor isn't just about having less money. It's that everything in your life actually costs you more.
The source text really lays out this grim reality. If you're struggling, you're the #1 target for predatory lenders with insane interest rates. You are way more likely to live in a neighborhood without healthy food options, to breathe polluted air, to have worse health care. You're even more likely to get a simple traffic ticket that you can't afford, which then sends you spiraling into debt. It's a system that can feel like it's designed to keep you down. And this really brings us to a harsh but pretty unavoidable conclusion. While we can, as a society, create more wealth overall, the way we distribute it, well, that's kind of a zero-sum game. For a very small number of people to have so much, it means that many others must have very little.
So, here we are, right back where we started, with John Adams' warning about that snowball. We know it's rolling, we know it's getting bigger and moving faster every single day. The question we have to ask ourselves now is, does it ever stop?
You ever wonder how the wealthiest families just seem to stay on top generation after generation after generation? It's not just luck, and it's not just about making a lot of money. It's about protecting that money. So today, we're going to open up the playbook and see exactly how modern dynasties keep their fortunes in the family. Let's dive right in. First, let's just get a sense of the scale we're talking about here. We are right in the middle of the single largest transfer of wealth in all of human history. Analysts are estimating that over the next 25 years, a truly staggering $68 trillion is going to be passed down from about 45 million American families.
But, for the people at the very, very top of that pyramid, this isn't as simple as just writing a check to their kids. Oh no, it's a highly sophisticated game of strategy, and the stakes are immense. So the big question is, what are their rules, and what kind of tools are they using? To really understand the game today, we have to see how the whole idea of dynastic power has changed. I mean, the goal is ancient, keep the family rich and powerful, but the methods, they've completely transformed. Think about it. For literally thousands of years, being rich meant being armed. Dynasties had actual armies. They protected their fortunes with swords and stone walls. But today, the battlefield has totally moved. It's not in the castle anymore. It's in the courtroom and the halls of Congress. A modern dynasty's army? Well, it's made up of lawyers, accountants, and lobbyists. So what's this modern army fighting for? Well, it boils down to creating and defending 3 essential conditions. First, pretty simple. The family's money has to grow faster than the family does. Second, passing that wealth down has to be smooth and easy. And third, and this is the big one, the rules of the game, things like tax policies, have to be written in a way that lets them keep as much of that wealth as legally possible. And that third condition, that's where things get really, really interesting. Because it starts to look like the rules aren't quite the same for everybody. It's almost like there's a 2-tiered system with a whole separate, private set of rules just for those at the very top. And don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described it perfectly, calling it, quote, a kind of private tax system. A system built by and for a tiny sliver of the population that just runs in parallel to the one that you and I use every year. Now, these advantages aren't just happy accidents or loopholes. The source material shows that they are often very intentional features, little snippets of legal language that get expertly slipped into these massive 1,000-page bills that have to pass. And once a feature like that is in the tax code, it is incredibly hard to get it back out. But here's the thing. What good are rules if there's no referee on the field to enforce them? Well, between 2010 and 2018, the IRS budget got systematically cut by almost $3 billion. The agency lost more than a fifth of its employees, especially those expert auditors, the ones you need to unravel the super complex finances of the ultra-rich. And the result of those cuts? Well, look at this. It's absolutely staggering. Back in 2010, the audit rate for people making over $10 million a year was about 23%. By 2018, it had dropped to almost zero, 0.03%. The referee was, for all intents and purposes, taken off the field. Okay, so you've got a favorable rulebook and a weakened referee. What plays do you run? This is where we get into the toolkit. And fair warning, it's a confusing alphabet soup of trusts. You got GRATs, CLATs, CRUTs, but they're all designed for basically one purpose, moving wealth from one generation to the next while paying as little tax as possible. Let's start with one of the most powerful tools in the box, the GRAT. That stands for Grantor Retained Annuity Trust. The simple way to think about it is this. It's a legal vehicle for separating an asset's future growth from its current value, and then handing all of that growth over to your kids, totally tax-free. So here's how the play works step by step. You put an asset, let's say it's a bunch of stock, into a special trust. Over the next couple of years, the trust pays you back the initial value of that stock. But, and here's the magic, if that stock's value just explodes, all of that growth, minus a tiny little IRS interest rate, goes straight to your heirs when the trust ends. It's not legally considered a gift, so there's no gift tax. Pretty slick? And this isn't just some theory. It gets incredibly powerful when you use it with assets that are about to blow up, like stock in a company before it goes public. Before the Facebook IPO, for example, founders and early execs reportedly used GRATs to move millions of shares. This let them pass on the insane growth that followed the IPO. We're talking hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars, to their beneficiaries with almost no tax paid. And of course, the tool just keeps getting better. An attorney for the Walton family, that's the Walmart fortune, perfected a version that's now known as the Walton GRAT. Basically, he figured out a way to structure it so it becomes a completely no-risk bet. It's essentially, heads, my kids win a fortune, tails, nothing happens. If the assets went up, the heirs won big. If they didn't, nobody lost a dime. All right, so next up in the toolkit is a cousin of the GRAT. It's called the CLAT, or Charitable Lead Annuity Trust.
Some people call it the Jackie O Trust. It works just like a GRAT, but with this one philanthropic twist. Instead of the yearly payments going back to you, they go to a charity, and very often it's the family's own foundation.
Let's go back to the Waltons. They've reportedly used CLATs to help fund their amazing Crystal Bridges Museum. Now, this strategy is just brilliant. They get to generate a huge charitable tax deduction, they get a ton of public goodwill for their philanthropy, all while the assets in the trust are growing. Then, at the end of the term, all that growth, hundreds of millions of dollars, passes directly to their kids, completely outside of the tax system. Okay, so we've seen these incredibly powerful tools like GRATs and CLATs that work inside the sort of private tax system. And all of this raises a huge question, right? With all of these perfectly legal strategies that are so effective at concentrating wealth, how does the system keep going? What makes it stick politically and culturally? Well, the sources we're looking at point to a few big reasons. Of course, there's the massive political power of the wealthy and the deep partisan gridlock that makes any kind of reform almost impossible. But there might be something even more fundamental going on, a uniquely American attitude about wealth itself. The musician Bono, who's Irish, actually nailed this cultural difference in an interview. He said that in the United States, you look at the guy in the mansion on the hill and you think, you know, if I work hard, one day I could live there. But in Ireland, he said, people look at that same mansion and think, one day I'm going to get that bastard. And that really lays out the two different mindsets perfectly, doesn't it? The American ethos has always been built around this idea of aspiration and opportunity. The dream isn't to tear the mansion down. It's the belief that you can build your own. And that fundamental belief, well, it might help explain why there's a tolerance for systems that allow for such incredible fortunes to be built and passed down. So there you have it. That's the playbook. From the grand strategy of shaping the laws themselves, right down to the nitty-gritty financial tools used to execute the plan. This is how modern dynasties work. And it leaves us with one final big question to think about. Who gets to write the next chapter? All right, let's talk about the American wealth fantasy. It's this incredibly powerful, really persistent dream. And we're going to dive into it by looking at a modern real estate expo, a scene that comes to us straight from Michael Mechanic's book, Jackpot. So I want you to picture this. You're in a huge, chilly convention hall. The bass from some techno music is just thumping in your chest. A guy literally bounds onto the stage as confetti explodes everywhere. He's Grant Cardone, a celebrity mega landlord, and he grabs the microphone and just roars at the crowd. Who wants a better life? Who wants a great life? Who wants to have it all? And his whole brand, his entire philosophy, it's built on this one super simple, really powerful slogan, 10x. See, the promise isn't just about making your life a little better. No, it's about multiplying it by 10. Your success, your mindset, and you guessed it, your bank account. This really gets to the heart of it. It's an all or nothing game. I mean, the title of one of his books says it all, right? You either commit with this total, all-consuming obsession, or you just have to resign yourself to being, well, average. There is no middle ground in this world. And you know that old saying, money can't buy happiness? Well, Cardone has a quick comeback for that. He says, I know that, bro, but it is the only thing Gulfstream takes if you want to fly private. And that line gets a massive cheer, because it just perfectly captures the whole unapologetic, materialistic vibe of the event. So yeah, this is the Real Estate Wealth Expo, where the American dream is literally being sold from the main stage. The promise isn't just about, paying your bills. It's about learning the secrets to have it all. And the advice you hear, it completely flies in the face of pretty much everything we were taught. Don't buy a home, you should rent. You should embrace debt, it's your friend. Saving money, that's poverty thinking. The whole message is to totally rewire how you think about money, to embrace risk and leverage and go big. But who's in the audience hanging on every single word? Well, the author. He steps away from the big show on stage to find out. Because the real story here isn't just the performance. It's the people who paid to be here, all hoping that this is their shot at a totally new life. And he meets all kinds of people. You've got a couple from Fresno who want to get into flipping houses. There's a guy who just casually says that a net income of, $4 million a year sounds about right. Then there's a woman earning less than $40,000 a year whose dream is to become a major philanthropist, and a young couple flipping mobile homes with their eyes on a life of pure luxury. But one attendee, A woman named Samara Harvey, she just sums up the whole collective feeling perfectly. She says, it's not really about the money, not when you get right down to it. She says, we're chasing freedom. And that just crystallizes the real desire that fuels this entire industry. It's about control, about choices, and about breaking free from being stuck.
But here's the thing. While all the attendees are busy chasing freedom, the organizers are running a very, very profitable business. The source makes the argument that this expo isn't really about real estate at all. It's about selling the dream of real estate wealth.
The business model itself is a classic bait and upsell. You use low-cost tickets and big-name celebrity headliners, think Sylvester Stallone or Pitbull, to get thousands of people through the door. But the real money isn't in those ticket sales. Oh no. It's made by selling these super high-priced seminars and mentorship packages that can cost thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of dollars.
And the author draws this fascinating parallel to the California gold rush. Think about it. The very first millionaire from that era, he wasn't a gold miner. Nope. He was a merchant named Samuel Brannan who bought up every single pick and shovel he could find and then sold them at insane markups. Just like Brannan was mining the miners, the expo organizers are getting rich off the gold rush of our time by selling the promise of wealth to all the dreamers.
So why does this model work so well? I mean, why are people so willing to believe in it? Well, it's because this promise taps directly into one of America's most powerful and oldest cultural myths, the idea of upward mobility.
This belief system has some really deep roots. It was popularized way back in 1868 with Horatio Alger's Rags to Riches novels. It was actually given a name in 1931 when James Truslow Adams coined the phrase the American dream. And this idea is so baked into the culture that even during the Great Depression, John Steinbeck noted that poor Americans didn't see themselves as some exploited class, but as temporarily embarrassed capitalists. But this is where our story takes a really sharp turn, because that powerful, endearing myth runs smack into a wall of cold, hard data. So what does the economic reality actually look like today?
Okay, let's start with this number. According to some major research, for Americans who were born back in 1940, achieving a core piece of the American dream, earning more than your parents, was basically a sure thing. A staggering 92% of them did it.
Now, look at this. This is the number for those born just over 4 decades later, in 1984. That 92% chance, it plummeted to just 50%. The dream went from being a near guarantee to literally a coin flip. Earning more than your parents is just not the norm anymore.
And yet, our belief in the dream just persists. This chart shows the disconnect perfectly. A Gallup poll found that most Americans were pretty satisfied with their opportunity to get ahead. But the reality? Well, according to Harvard economists, actual economic mobility in the U.S. is lower than in most of Europe. The researchers who studied this put it very bluntly. After comparing what people believe to what's actually happening, they concluded that when it comes to the chances of moving up the economic ladder, Americans are, simply put, over-optimistic. So you might be thinking, okay, so what? What's the harm in being a little optimistic? Well, according to the source material, this massive disconnect between our belief and the reality, it comes with a profound societal price. Sociologists actually have a name for this: mobility optimism. It's this idea that even when people see huge rising inequality all around them, their own personal belief that they, or at least their kids, can still make it big, well, that belief insulates them from demanding policy changes to fix that inequality. And this has a huge domino effect. This optimism leads to a greater tolerance for massive wealth gaps. It weakens support for government action. It fuels these makers versus takers narratives that say poverty is just a failure of individual effort, which in turn is used to justify cutting social safety nets. And all of this brings us to one final, really provocative question. Does this deeply ingrained belief in upward mobility, the very fantasy that fills up those giant convention halls, actually prevent us from confronting our real economic situation? What do you think?
Let's talk about the hidden cost of success, because for Black Americans, that cost can be incredibly steep. And honestly, it's a story that's best told through one man's journey. We're going to follow Erwin Raphael from a pretty tense roadside encounter all the way to a high-powered boardroom. And in doing so, we'll uncover a system of barriers that has shaped American wealth for centuries.
To really get this, we have to go back, way back. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote this over a century ago, and it is brutally honest. It just cuts right to the core assumption that's kind of been baked into the American system, the idea that some people are just meant to own everything. And that idea right there is the foundation for everything we're about to talk about.
Okay, so picture this. It's the late 1980s, rural Ohio. Outside this dusty roadhouse, there are a bunch of Harleys lined up, some of them even sporting Confederate flags. This is where we meet a young Erwin Raphael. He's just a college kid, a long, long way from home, and he has absolutely no idea this one moment is about to define so much of his life.
See, he wasn't looking for trouble. He and his friend were just a couple of college kids, totally lost on their way to a music festival. And for Raphael, who grew up in St. Croix, this is, well, it's unfamiliar territory in more ways than one. All they wanted were directions. That's it, the simplest request you can possibly make. But what they got back was something else entirely.
That's the welcome they got, a phrase just dripping with hatred, designed to do one thing: tell them they don't belong. You're at the wrong bar. That single sentence, man, it echoes through Raphael's life. It becomes a metaphor for every single door, social, economic, political, that has been slammed shut in the face of Black Americans.
Now, let's fast forward to today. That scared young man is now Erwin Raphael, a wealthy, powerful automotive executive. I mean, he has made it into rooms most people only dream of getting into. But what's so fascinating is that even in those polished boardrooms, he says he can still feel the ghost of that Ohio roadhouse, that lingering sense that someone in the room is thinking he's in the wrong bar.
And you know, Raphael's background makes this all even more compelling. He grew up in St. Croix, a majority Black island that never had Jim Crow laws. His doctors, his teachers, all the leaders in his community, they looked like him. So for him, Black success was just normal. He was raised to believe he could be absolutely anything, a mindset that was going to be put to the ultimate test the second he set foot on the mainland.
So that constant challenge he faced, that invisible headwind always pushing against him, well, there's a name for that. It's a concept that explains the massive gap between his potential and the barriers constantly in his way. It's called the black tax.
And let's be super clear here. The black tax isn't something you file in April. It's the total weight of every systemic disadvantage, all rolled into one. It's the extra effort you have to put in, the higher costs you have to pay, the constant, draining need to be on guard, and just the sheer emotional exhaustion of navigating a system that wasn't built for you.
And here's what that tax looks like in reality, in cold, hard numbers. The median white household in America has a net worth of $171,000. For the median Black household, it's just $17,100. That is a staggering 10-to-1 difference. This isn't just bad luck. This is the bill for centuries of the black tax coming due.
Let's take it to the absolute extreme. In a country with over 40 million Black Americans, how many billionaires do you think there are? The answer is 7. Just 7. Which, of course, leads to this question: if the population is about 13.4% Black, then simple math tells you there should be around 105 Black billionaires. The massive gap between 7 and 105 shows you this isn't just an issue of poverty at the bottom, it's a hard cap on wealth and power at the very, very top.
So how in the world did we get here? Well, this gap didn't just happen by accident. It was designed. For centuries, American policy was specifically built to systematically block Black families from building any kind of real wealth.
You can think of it like this. Slavery was the ultimate tax. 100% of your labor, your freedom, your life, just stolen. Then, after the Civil War, the Homestead Acts gave away huge amounts of land, the foundation of American wealth, almost exclusively to white families. Then came Jim Crow laws, creating endless economic roadblocks. And even into the 20th century, you have redlining, which basically cut Black families off from the #1 engine of middle-class wealth, owning a home.
Let's just zoom in on the Homestead Acts for a second, because the scale is just mind-blowing. The U.S. government gave away 270 million acres of land. It was the ultimate seed capital. 1.6 million white families got a piece of it, creating generations of wealth. And how many Black families? Only about 5,000. Today, an estimated 48 million white Americans are direct descendants of that giveaway. It was a nation-building program that built a nation for some and left others behind.
But that was all in the past, right? Well, let's get back to Erwin Raphael. Because his modern-day experiences show that personal wealth and success are not a shield.
The black tax is still being collected today in ways that are both dangerous and deeply demeaning.
Raphael, driving his nice company car, gets pulled over. Before he can even figure out what's going on, the police officer draws his gun. The officer doesn't see a corporate executive. He sees a threat and asks if he's on parole. In that moment, his success, his title, his wealth, all of it was completely invisible. He was just a black man who's perceived as being in the wrong place.
And his terror in that moment, it connects to a shared, painful experience in the black community known as the talk. It's a set of survival instructions parents give their children for how to handle police encounters just to increase their chances of coming home alive. This is a profound psychological tax, a burden of fear that's carried every single day.
And the tax isn't always life-threatening. Sometimes it's about being made to feel invisible. Raphael is leading a meeting, sitting at the head of the table. But the vendors who are pitching to his company repeatedly look right past him and only address his white female subordinate. Even when his authority is undeniable, it's just dismissed. He's the one in charge, but he's not being seen.
So, after looking at all this history and the present-day reality, the question becomes, what do we do about it? How do we start to dismantle this system and actually forge a real path forward?
So what's the game plan? Well, former marketing exec Omar Johnson says we have to start treating this like any other business problem. It starts simply, hire more black people, period. But it can't stop there. It means actually investing in that talent, mentoring them, developing them, promoting them. It means partnering with and pouring money into black-owned businesses. And maybe the most important step, it means everyone has to get comfortable with the discomfort of real, systemic change.
And that brings us to our final thought. From Ford Foundation President Darren Walker, a friend of his who grew up poor but became very successful, was worried that reforms might take away advantages for his own kids. Walker's reply was this, and it's really a challenge to all of us. The goal isn't just to help the few who've already made it secure their own family's success. No, the real work is to change the system for the kid who is just starting out right now, the one facing that same steep path today, the one who needs to know unequivocally that there is no such thing as a wrong bar.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into some numbers that tell a story that's both fascinating and, honestly, a little frustrating. It's about wealth, power, and who really gets to hold the keys to the kingdom. So what's this number? 7.4%. Back in 2020, that was the percentage of Fortune 500 companies run by women. And you know what? It was actually celebrated as an all-time high, a real sign of progress, or so it seemed. But here's the thing. That number, as important as it is, really only shows us what's happening in the boardroom. If we pull back, really zoom out and look at the world of extreme personal wealth, well, the picture changes a lot. How about 9 to 1? That's the ratio globally of men to women who are worth $30 million or more. Let that sink in for a second. For every single woman in that ultra-wealthy club, there are 9 men. So this begs a really important question, right? Why is the very peak of wealth so overwhelmingly male? This goes way beyond just talking about corporate salaries. We're talking about the real engines of power and wealth creation. So what is really going on here? All right, to really get a grip on today's gap, we've got to travel back in time. We need to look at the actual walls, the historical hurdles that were, let's be honest, pretty much built to keep women out of the game entirely. And what's just wild isn't just that these barriers existed, but how recent they are. We're not talking about ancient history. For decades, the main ways you'd build wealth, getting into an elite school, getting access to capital, were either totally blocked or fiercely fought against. Just think about this. Up until 1974, a woman in the U.S. couldn't even get a simple bank loan on her own. It didn't matter how much she earned. She needed a man to co-sign. It's crazy. And this opposition wasn't some quiet, polite disagreement. Oh no. The source material talks about a culture of actively protecting the old guard. When Princeton finally went co-ed, one alum actually wrote that his beloved university was now dead. Another one was worried about, and I'm quoting here, disconcerting mini-skirted young things cavorting on its playing fields. You really can't make this stuff up. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. How does that history play out today? Well, let's take a look at the super lucrative worlds of finance and venture capital. So you might be thinking, okay, is this just a performance issue? Maybe the guys are just better at it. Well, the data says absolutely not.
Research shows that hedge funds run by women, they are just as profitable as the ones run by men. The results? Basically identical. But then, look at this. Even with that equal performance, funds that have at least one female manager are actually more likely to fail. So what gives? It's pretty simple and pretty frustrating. They just attract way fewer investors. The money, for some reason, just isn't following the results. And if you need one statistic that just sums it all up, get this. There are more U.S. hedge funds started by men named David than by all women combined. It's stunning. The men who control what the source calls the money spigot, they just don't seem to trust women with their cash. And a lot of times, this bias is completely unconscious. You know, there's actually a name for this. It's called pattern matching. Basically, investors, who are often men, unconsciously look for founders who fit a familiar mold, someone who looks and sounds like them, or like other people who've been successful in the past. And who does that tend to be? Yep, other men. It creates this powerful, vicious cycle that just keeps women and minorities on the outside looking in. And this whole bias thing is just perfectly summed up in the story of a technologist named Kim Pelez. She was a true pioneer back in the dot-com era, but man, did she face a different kind of spotlight. So here she is, literally building foundational technology for the internet. And what does the media focus on? Her looks? Her public profile? A 1999 Fortune article called her story a cautionary tale and nicknamed her the Madonna of Silicon Valley. They were more interested in her as a so-called geek sex symbol than as a brilliant CEO. And it didn't just go away. Years later, in 2012, a Forbes writer basically dismissed everything she'd done. He suggested the only reason she made it onto Time magazine's list of most influential Americans was because, and I quote, she was young, pretty, and a good speaker. Not, because of her actual business genius. But let's talk about the reality, shall we? While the media was busy being snarky, Kim Pelez was busy generating massive results. We're talking co-creating the Java programming language, launching the very first startup built on a Java platform, taking that company public, and delivering a massive home run return for her investors. I mean, come on. So the perception was that her company, Marimba, was a failure, a flameout. But the reality? It was bought for $239 million, and its technology is still foundational today. It's probably quietly powering stuff in your life right now, from your work computer to your smart fridge.
Okay, so what about the women who do manage to break through that ceiling? What happens then? Well, it turns out they find a whole new set of rules and, frankly, old-school attitudes waiting for them right at the top.
The source material paints a picture of this kind of unwritten code. First off, there's this automatic assumption that you didn't actually earn your money. Then, if you're a high-earning woman, you're not a strong leader. You're an angry bulldog. And the financial advisors? Often totally dismissive, acting like these women need to ask for permission to make big decisions with their own money. This is highlighted perfectly by the story of a banker named Susan Davis. She noticed something happening at her bank. Whenever one of the wealthy male clients passed away, their widows were just left completely in the dark. So what did she do? She secretly started holding these little financial education classes just for them. And the women loved it. They were so happy, they told all their friends, and suddenly, all these new clients were flocking to the bank. She ended up winning her bank's top award for a program her bosses didn't even know she was running. And according to Davis, this all boils down to a really fundamental difference. She says that women tend to have a philosophy of good for all. They want to know if a decision is good for everyone involved. Men, on the other hand, often have a philosophy of better than. It's about winning, about making more than the next guy. And that really leaves us with a final, big question to think about. What kind of world would we have if more of the major financial decisions, the ones that shape everything, were based on what's good for all? If more of the world's wealth was controlled by people with that mindset, I mean, just imagine how our priorities, our planet, even our society, might be totally different. Let's talk about philanthropy, giving money to a good cause. Sounds pretty simple, right? But what if I told you that the whole act of giving could be way more complicated and maybe even more problematic than it seems? We're about to find out that trying to give it all the way might just be one of the most revealing things a person can do. And hey, this isn't some new 21st century problem. We're talking more than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle himself was pointing out the big challenge with charity.
It's one thing to hand over money, it's another thing entirely to do it well. And that ancient piece of wisdom? It's the perfect place for us to start digging into the messy, thorny business of giving today.
Okay, let's make this real for a second. Imagine someone hands you a check for $10,000 for your birthday. Awesome, right? But for most of us, it's not going to totally change our lives. Now think about this. A homeless mom, for her, just a quarter of that, $2,500, is everything. It's enough to get an apartment, to find a stable place, to get back on her feet and find a job. That simple comparison just forces this really tough question on you. Who actually needs the money more? To really get our heads around modern philanthropy, we have to go back to the beginning, to its founding father, really, the industrialist Andrew Carnegie. He basically created what you could call the gospel of giving, and it's a philosophy that has shaped how the super rich think about their money ever since. Carnegie's idea was, frankly, pretty radical. He believed that leaving your kids a giant fortune was basically a curse that would just ruin their character. So what was his solution? He said the wealthy have a moral duty to spend their fortunes for the public good while they're still alive, and just let their kids go out and make their own way in the world. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. The source material tells this incredible story about a wealth advisor named Richard Watts. The side of his family that got this huge inheritance, it was just plagued by tragedy, suicides, and they ended up with nothing. But his own father, who walked away from all that money, he built his own life and his kids did just fine. It's a seriously chilling, real-world example of what Carnegie was warning about. Okay, so that's the noble idea, right? But that ideal has a pretty significant dark side. Because today, all this mega philanthropy, it often raises more questions than it answers. Is it really about helping people? Or is it a tool for something else entirely? This brings us to a really important idea: reputation laundering. You know what this is? It's basically using philanthropy as a giant PR shield. You make a huge donation to a fancy museum or a university, and suddenly you've got this halo of goodwill around you, and it helps distract everybody from how you actually made all that money in the first place. And the poster child for this, of course, is the Sackler family. For years, you saw their name in gold letters on the walls of the Met, the Louvre, thanks to over $60 million in donations. But at the exact same time, their company, Purdue Pharma, was pushing OxyContin, fueling an opioid crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. The philanthropy wasn't just charity, it was covert. And you see these kinds of contradictions all over the place. Take Jeff Bezos. He pledged $2 billion to fight homelessness, a huge number. But that grand gesture comes while his company, Amazon, paid an effective federal tax rate of just 3% and was actively fighting a local tax in Seattle, a tax designed specifically to raise money for homeless services. Now, let's look at another giant pledge. Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan made this huge promise to give away 99% of their Facebook stock. And on the surface, you hear that and you think, wow, that's incredible. It sounds like they're really committed to that old Carnegie ideal. But context is everything. You always have to ask, what about that last 1%? Well, that tiny little slice they decided to keep? At the time, it was worth over $822 million. It just shows you, for a billionaire, giving away almost everything can still leave you with more money than most people can even dream of. And get this, that's not even the whole story. That $822 million doesn't even touch his other big investments, or his real estate portfolio that's worth over $219 million. It makes you realize that when a billionaire says they're giving it all away, the word all means something very, very different. So you might be wondering, has anyone ever actually done it for real? Has anyone truly followed Carnegie's advice to die with nothing? Well, yes, one person has, and his story is so wild they nicknamed him the James Bond of philanthropy. Meet Chuck Feeney. He co-founded those duty-free shoppers stores you see in airports, and over 3 decades, he secretly, and I mean secretly, gave away his entire fortune. We're talking $9 billion. So after giving away $9 billion, what did he keep for himself and his wife? Just $2 million for their retirement. Think about that for a second. For every $100,000 he gave away, he kept about $25 for himself. That is a whole different universe of giving. And the guy's whole life backed this up. This wasn't a show. He grew up in a working-class family. He always flew coach. He wore a $15 watch. And he gave anonymously for decades because he was just genuinely uncomfortable with being rich. For him, money was just a way of keeping score in business,
not something you were supposed to hoard or show off. Feeney's story is amazing, but he is the exception that proves the rule. And his story makes you ask a much bigger question. Why is he so rare? The answer, it turns out, lies in the system itself, a system of rules for giving that was designed over 100 years ago, and actually makes all that reputation laundering we talked about possible. And what's so wild is that we almost got it right from the very beginning. When John D. Rockefeller first tried to create his foundation, Congress freaked out. They called it an undemocratic power grab. They demanded public oversight and a rule that the foundation had to spend all its money within 50 years. But Rockefeller just went around them, got his foundation set up in New York without any of those rules, and created a model for private power with zero public accountability.
And that model he created led directly to the rules we have today. A private foundation, which could be sitting on billions and billions of dollars, is only legally required to spend a mere 5% of its assets each year to keep its tax-free status. Just 5%.
But wait, it gets even crazier. That 5%? It doesn't all have to go to actual charities. It also includes the foundation's own costs, paying their staff, renting their fancy offices, even flying board members around for meetings. All of that can count towards the 5%. So the actual amount reaching people in need can be way, way less.
So for the money that does get out there, where is it going? You'd probably think it's going to help the poor, right? Well, the data tells a very different story. For the wealthiest donors, less than 4% of their giving goes to basic human needs. The huge majority, it goes to places like universities, hospitals, and museums, the kinds of institutions the wealthy already use and support.
And here's the part that should make all of us sit up a little straighter. We, you and me, are actually subsidizing this whole system through our taxes. When a billionaire donates $1,000, their tax deduction means it might only cost them, say, $750. But for an average person, that same $1,000 donation costs them the full $1,000. In effect, everyday taxpayers are helping to pay for the pet projects of the ultra-rich. And because the legal definition of a charity is so incredibly broad, this public subsidy leads to something, well, frankly, it's horrifying. It means our tax dollars can end up supporting organizations that have been officially designated as hate groups, groups that are actively anti-LGBTQ, anti-immigrant, and promote white nationalism. Which brings us to our final big question. We started with what seemed like a simple, noble idea, giving money away. But what we found is a system that seems to benefit the rich more than the poor, that can actually reinforce inequality, and can even let public money subsidize hate. So if this is the system we have, maybe it's time we start to rethink what generosity even means.
You see it all the time, right? Billionaires giving away huge fortunes, giant foundations funding all these noble causes. We call it philanthropy, and we're told it's the solution. But what if it's not? What if it's actually part of the problem? We're going to dig into that today, using a really fascinating chapter from Michael Mechanic's book, Jackpot, as our guide.
You know, this quote is from the 1800s, but wow, does it feel relevant right now? We all kind of know something's broken with how wealth and inequality work, but trying to imagine how that story actually ends, a real, workable solution, yeah, that's the hard part. And that really gets us to the heart of what we're talking about today. What if the whole idea of giving back actually lets us off the hook? What if it lets us ignore the very systems that create so much need in the first place? Almost like a convenient way to look away. So this brings us to what our source calls the philanthropy paradox. And it's a pretty uncomfortable idea. It's this notion that a lot of philanthropy is basically just putting band-aids on wounds that the philanthropists themselves had a hand in creating. Okay, so this is where it gets really stark. Think about it. A company might fight against a living wage for its own workers, but then its CEO gets praised for $1 million donation to a food bank. Or a foundation might have billions invested in fossil fuels, while at the same time it's funding a climate change initiative. You see the disconnect? That's the complicity that sits right at the center of this paradox. To really understand this from the inside, we're going to follow the story of a guy named Darren Walker. Now, he's the president of the Ford Foundation, one of the most powerful in the world. But the way he got there, well, it gives him a perspective that almost no one else in his position has. And you have to understand, Walker's life story isn't just some interesting background info. No, it's everything. It's the entire foundation for his mission, which is to fix philanthropy, not by shouting from the outside, but by trying to change the rules from the inside. I mean, just look at this journey. The distance he traveled it's just immense. From a tiny shotgun house on a dirt road to being in charge of a $13 billion endowment. He still remembers the feeling of his first real wool sweater. It was a hand-me-down from a wealthy family. And that feeling, of being on the outside looking in, that never really went away. And this story, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? He's at a reception for this elite group at his university. He's the leader. They call him the abbot. He goes to introduce himself, and a woman just cuts him off and orders a drink, assuming he's the waiter. He said it happened all the time. People were so conditioned. They looked at him and could only see one possible reason for him to be in that room. So all of these experiences, his whole life, it brought him to this one really powerful conclusion. He realized charity was just treating symptoms. He didn't want to just keep slapping on more Band-Aids. He wanted to go deeper and fix the broken plumbing of the whole system that was causing the injuries. So how do you fix the plumbing? Well, Walker's big idea was to change how foundations invest their money. It's something called the double bottom line, or impact investing. The idea is actually pretty simple. Can the money your foundation invests make a solid financial return and do good in the world at the same time? And get this, he wasn't just talking a big game here. To prove this could actually work, Walker convinced his board to commit $1 billion. $1 billion of the Ford Foundation's money into these mission-related investments. He basically had to show the entire financial world that you really can do well by doing good. And really, this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one that Walker uses all the time, just nails it. It's this powerful reminder to look past the act of giving and ask the tougher question. Why is this charity even necessary to begin with? Okay, so that's one approach, reform from the inside. But what if that's not enough? What if the only real answer is to just walk away from it all? Now we're going to look at a totally different and way more radical approach. So let's meet Tracy Gary. She's kind of the mirror image of Darren Walker. He had to fight tooth and nail to get into this world of wealth. She was born right in the middle of it. But while Walker is trying to change the system from within, Gary decided the most powerful move she could make was to give up her seat at the table completely. So her story kicks off with an inheritance of $1.2 million. Now, for most people, that's it, right? You're set for life. That's the ultimate safety net. But not for Tracy. She saw that money as something completely different, a tool. She started this very intentional process of just giving it away, about $100,000 a year to causes and people who really needed it. And she just kept going until there was nothing left. Zero. She literally burned her financial safety net. All gone. She decided she wanted to live like, as she puts it, the rest of the world. So why would anyone do that? Well, let's hear it from her. She says if you want to be happier, you should redistribute your wealth and power. For her, this wasn't about guilt. It was about freedom. Freedom from the burden of managing wealth. She says she's blissfully happy. She doesn't have cash, and she just doesn't care. Okay, so we've got these two really different stories, right? You've got Darren Walker, the reformer trying to fix the system, and Tracy Gary, the radical who just opted out. What happens when you put them together? What's the path forward here? First, let's get real about what's at stake. This quote from the plutocrat Nick Hanauer, it's pretty blunt. He's saying the pitchforks aren't some future threat that might be coming. They're already here. The social unrest, the political anger, that is the rebellion. It's happening now.
And look, a lot of that anger is completely justified. But our source makes a really interesting point. Anger alone isn't the answer. It might be the spark that starts the fire, yeah, but to actually build something new and lasting, you need something else, something harder, empathy.
And this is where it all lands. This is the big takeaway. The real solution isn't about writing bigger checks. It's about sacrifice. And we're not talking about a tax deduction. We're talking about willingly giving up your spot at the front of the line, giving up some of your privilege so that other people have a shot.
And so that leaves every one of us with a really personal question to chew on. It's easy to point fingers at the billionaires, but what about the rest of us? What advantages, big or small, am I personally willing to give up to make things just a little bit fairer? That's the real question, isn't it? Something to think about.